Chapter 9:12. At the moment when the crowd was in chaos, two sharp whistles rang out, and then half a bloody corpse was thrown down from the sky. This caused an even bigger commotion. People were running in all directions, and there were cries and wails. Zhang Ming looked up. His eyesight was very good. Even in the dark of night, he could see a black shadow that looked like a huge eagle circling in the sky. However, upon closer inspection, he realized that it was a demon with a human face and an eagle beak. It had wings on its shoulders and legs on its lower body. This kind of strange-looking monster was obviously one that had not reached perfection in its transformation. It had gone astray and would not be able to achieve anything in the future. He could kill it with the lightning palm that his teacher had taught him. However, when he subconsciously raised his hand, he suddenly realized that there was no spiritual opportunity here and he could not use the lightning palm. The bird demon circled above the panicking crowd, then suddenly swooped down, grabbed a child, and flew up. A middle-aged woman let out a heart-wrenching scream. She grabbed the child's legs and refused to let him go. The bird demon flapped its wings twice but was unable to grab the child. If someone went forward to help, they might be able to save the child. However, the surrounding people were afraid of the demon. None of them dared to go forward. They all stayed far away. Zhang Ming looked around and saw a stone on the ground. He bent down to pick it up, but just as he was about to throw it, he discovered that the demon had already taken the child and was about 50, 60 feet into the sky. Seeing that they were about to disappear, Zhang Ming became anxious and used all of his strength to throw the stone in that direction. Under the control of his strength, the stone flew extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it hit the bird demon's wings. It struck the bird demon's wings, and with a crack, it was instantly broken. The bird demon howled in pain, and its body swayed. It actually fell from the sky, and the child fell with it. Zhang Ming cursed. With the child's small body, falling from such a high altitude would definitely kill him. However, it was too late to save him. At this moment, a burly man suddenly leaped out and landed on the ground in a flash. He then pushed up with both hands. A muffled sound was heard. He actually managed to catch the little boy firmly. As if nothing had happened, the burly man touched him from head to toe and saw that there was no defect on his body. He put it down and stood up. He took out a small hammer from his waist and quickly walked towards the bird demon. He hit its head several times. At first, the bird demon let out a miserable scream, but after a dozen breaths, it stopped moving and stopped breathing. When the woman saw that her son was saved, she was extremely excited. She went up and hugged him tightly. Just now, the child was scared silly. As soon as he was in the woman's embrace, he immediately burst into tears. The burly man wiped the sweat from his forehead, panted a few times, and walked towards Zhang Ming. Just now, Zhang Ming didn't notice, but now he could clearly see that this person was much taller than the average person. His face was covered with a beard, and his appearance was very fierce. Elder Yu said from behind, "Little Taoist, don't be alarmed. This is my son, Yu Duan. Although he is a little ugly, his character is not bad." Yu Duan saw that Zhang Ming knew his father and was stunned. He then grinned and gave him a thumbs up and praised, "Little Taoist, you are very capable. These demons have thick skin and flesh. Normal knives and axes can't cut them. I didn't expect you to hit them with a stone." Zhang Ming said, "I am ashamed, I did not think it through. If it wasn't for Brother Yu, I wouldn't have been able to save them." Yu Duan shook his head and said, "It's better than being fed to the demons." Elder Yu said, "Duan, did you come back with an empty stomach again?" Yu Duan was a little embarrassed and said, "Originally, Marquis Rong gave me some food, but on the way here I saw a friend in a difficult situation, so I gave it to him." Elder Yu looked like he knew this would happen, but he didn't blame him and said, "In this chaotic world, it's not easy for everyone. If you help, then help. This is also a moral thing to do. But remember, you still have sister-in-law and nephew behind you. The family can't do without you." Yu Duan said, father is right. Elder Yu said, Longu has prepared some porridge for you. Go and have some. I still have questions for you later. The woman ran over with the child and thanked Zhang Ming and Yu Duan profusely. At the same time, a man with red eyes and the appearance of a scholar came over. He cupped his hands and said, This Taoist priest, I would like to ask you to help me save the dead. Zhang Ming noticed that behind him, there were a few people collecting the severed corpse. The scholar's eyes dimmed and said, That's my brother. Elder Yu sighed and said, Little Taoist priest, if you can help, then help. Zhang Ming was a little hesitant. In his memory, his sect was pursuing the celestial way, a way to come out of the mortal world. Naturally, he wouldn't do anything to save the dead. But he couldn't bear to refuse. After thinking for a while, he said, Then how about this little Taoist priest recite a part of my master's tranquil heart scripture? The scholar had never heard of this scripture, but he was only here to seek comfort. He bowed and said, Then I'll have to trouble you, Taoist priest. Zhang Ming sat down cross-legged and regulated his breathing. When his breathing was even, he slowly opened his mouth and recited the scripture sentence by sentence. The cadence of his voice was like a small stream, clear and melodious. It was also like the plants in spring, full of vitality in the silence. Everyone who heard it was at peace. Their hearts were filled with endless hope. Even the sorrowful atmosphere faded a little. After a long time, he finally finished reciting this part of the scripture. Elder Yu sighed, The dead are gone, the living are like this. The scholar came up and bowed to him. He put down 2 bags of dried meat and bowed again. Then, he left with his people. Yu Duan stared at Zhang Ming for a while and said, Little Taoist priest is really capable. Zhang Ming was a little embarrassed and said, Brother Yu, you flatter me. Yu Duan laughed. He went to the back to drink some porridge and came back out. Then, he sat down and said, Father, what do you want to ask me? Elder Yu stroked his beard and said, Can you recognize where this demon came from? Yu Duan said, Like the soldiers under King Gu Yang. Elder Yu's face was filled with worry and said, If that's the case, the demon king is about to catch up. Yu Duan said, Father, don't worry. There are 300 personal guards from the constabulary here. It's not a problem to deal with those little demons. Every time the demon king eats a human, he will sleep for a year and a half. By then, my family would have already arrived at Dalu City. He revealed a look of unwavering confidence. He emphasized, It will definitely be all right. Elder Yu nodded silently. Yu Duan turned his head and asked his niece beside him, Just now, when the demon comes, are you afraid? Said, with second uncle here, is not afraid. Yu Duan laughed and carried her over. He lifted her up a few times, causing the little girl to giggle. Zhang Ming was somewhat affected and a smile appeared on his face. At this moment, he suddenly thought of something. He asked curiously, Brother Yu. Just now, when you jump, you seem to be able to jump further than normal people. Your arms are also very strong. Have you practiced the Qi training method? Yu Duan said, Little Taoist priest is not wrong. But it's not any Qi training method. It's the mental energy elixir passed down from the constabulary Rong. After consuming it, one's strength multiplies and can last for 2 hours. But after that, one's limbs will be sore. Zhang Ming said, Can you let me take a look at it? Yu Duan said straightforwardly, Nothing is impossible. He took out a paper bag and passed it over. Zhang Ming took it and poured some on his palm. He sniffed it and discovered that there were a few herbs that he was familiar with. The medicinal effects were very strong, but there were some other herbs that he couldn't recognize. But he was sure that it was used to stimulate one's vital energy. If a normal person consumed it, their strength would indeed increase and it would be enough to deal with some little demons that have yet to transform. But there was a flaw. If one consumed it for a long period of time, it would hurt their foundation. He thought for a while and reminded, Brother Yu, it's best to use this kind of medicine sparingly. I'll give you a talisman. He took out a light yellow talisman. This is called the cauldron-carrying talisman. Using it will give you the strength of 10 people. Boil it before you use it and drink it with water. Yu Duan said carelessly, then I'll thank little Taoist priest. He took it and stuffed it into his pocket, as if he didn't take it to heart. Old Yu said, Duan, little Taoist priest is not someone who speaks nonsense. You must remember these words. Yu Duan said, Father, do you think I don't know that this medicine is strange? But I'm a soldier of the manor, what can I do if I don't use it? I might as well use this to kill more demons and become a proper personal guard of the manor. When the time comes, there will be a chi training method for me. Once I've mastered this method, my bones will be strong and I'll be able to fight with those demon generals. Zhang Ming looked at the demon's corpse on the ground and said, then is this demon useful? Yu Duan shook his head and said, if not for little Taoist priest's stone, how could I have killed it? This item should be yours. At this time, a few miles east of them, there were dozens of carriages parked. In the middle of them was a luxuriously decorated carriage that was covered by curtains. Marquis Rong, Yang Shuang, reclined in the carriage. He was in his early 40s and had taken good care of himself. His skin was smooth and white, and his hair was neat and black. However, there was an unconcealable haze on his face. The curtains were lifted and Crown Prince Yang Tong walked in. He reported softly, Father, the Gushan city in the south has been attacked by demons. I heard that tens of thousands of people have died. On this yellow road, only Dalus city in the north and Guyang city in the east are still intact. Marquis Rong didn't even lift his eyelids. The people who died were all lowly commoners. That old fox Wang Liang must have escaped long ago. Father is wise. Marquis Rong was about to speak when he heard a commotion outside. He said unhappily, what is it? Yang Tong said, I'm going out to ask. After a while, he turned back and said, I heard that a condor demon was killed in the back. When Marquis Rong heard this, he perked up a little. Go, he said, order someone to bring the bird demon's corpse here. Skin it and boil its bones into a broth. Give it to Huan, and the others to drink, so that they can cultivate their qi. Yang Tong said in surprise, Huan, and the others are still young. I'm afraid they can't bear it. Should we wait a few more years? This demon's bone and blood could be used in conjunction with some qi cultivation techniques. The 300 guards had all been cultivated in this way. However, if an ordinary person didn't know about this secret technique, or wasn't old enough or hadn't nurtured well enough, they would die from brain hemorrhaging. Marquis Rong was furious when he heard this. A few more years. All of you are good-for-nothings. How could this Ho have the time to wait for you? When we reach Dalus City, do you want Le Ho to laugh at me? Even if you have to drink it, you have to drink it. If you die, then you are not a descendant of the Yang family. Yang Tong didn't dare to raise his head after being scolded. He could only retreat in embarrassment. With a cold expression, he called a servant over and said, Go, summon 2 guards and bring me the condor demon's corpse. Chapter 9:13. Even though the bird demon was gone, everyone felt that it wasn't safe to rest by the river, so they moved to a forest by the river to lie down. There were many people here, so they weren't afraid of any wild beasts, but they were afraid that demons would attack again. Even though the night was cold, they didn't dare to light a fire. Elder Yu gave the blanket to the pregnant woman, and hugged San, to keep warm. Both grandfather and grandson were shivering from the cold. Zhang Ming saw this and took out a jade tablet, saying, Uncle Yu, this can warm you up. Elder Yu's reaction was a little slow, and just as he was about to say something, he felt a warm object being stuffed into his hands. He then felt his body warming up, and said, Thank you, little Taoist. Zhang Ming said, You're welcome, uncle. Elder Yu held it for a while, and felt his body warm up. He looked at him and said, Little Taoist, do you have any relatives in this world? Zhang Ming shook his head, and because he was still thinking of finding his master, he asked, Uncle Yu, in this world, are there many Taoists like me? Elder Yu shook his head, and said, In the past there were some, but now there aren't many. Zhang Ming asked, why is that? Elder Yu finally became spirited, and stroked his beard, saying, I've read in the ancient records that thousands of years ago, countries worshipped Taoism, and it was prosperous for a period of time. But I don't know what happened, but the Taoists either left, or went into seclusion in the mountains, and rarely came into the world again. 100 years ago, the demons were wreaking havoc, and the emperor listened to my advice and invited a few Taoists to come out of the mountains to subdue the demons, but I only found out later. These were all people who pretended to be mysterious, and if they weren't eaten by the demons, they ran away. After this incident, the number of Taoists in the world dwindled, and the Taoist temples on the mountains were gradually abandoned. In the past few years, it's hard to see any Taoists anymore. Zhang Ming said, but when you first met me, you didn't seem to have a different opinion. Elder Yu smiled, there's a reason for that. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I went to school. When I was 5 or 6, my father had a good friend who was a Taoist. I once saw with my own eyes how he turned paper into a person and moved a 1,000-kilogram cauldron around. I know that there really are miraculous techniques in this world, but it's a pity. It was said that after the Taoist priest passed away, not a single disciple can use this technique anymore. Zhang Ming nodded. The art of movement was just a small skill, and it was not difficult to learn. However, this technique, it should have been driven by spiritual opportunity, but now he could not feel it at all. This must be the reason why the disciple of the same sect could not learn it. As the two of them spoke softly, Elder Yu gradually felt sleepy and he lay down on the bed. But just at this moment, the sound of galloping horses could be heard from outside, heading straight for the forest by the river bank. Zhang Ming stood up to look, and saw that there were 2 people, both dressed as servants and guards, galloping along the river, circling around the bird demon, pointing with their horsewhip. Who killed this? After he shouted twice, Yu Duan stood up and strode out. He cupped his fists and said, it's me. The head servant took a few glances at him and frowned, I seem to have seen you somewhere before. Yu Duan said, yes, I am Yu Duan. Half a month ago, I stopped a frightened horse in front of Marquis Rong, and was rewarded to be a soldier in front of the residence. Now I am under Commander Li's command. When the 2 guards heard this, they instantly revealed a look of disappointment. They originally thought that this was a good job. If the other party did not have any background, they could find someone to cover up the fact that he killed the demon. But the other party was working under Marquis Rong like them, so it was not easy to do anything. Although the soldier was not a personal guard of the residence, he had connections. Once he asked for the details, he immediately understood that they could not do anything. The head servant said angrily, since you are one of us, I think you know the rules. Every demon that is killed must be handed over to the Marquis residence. This time the young Marquis is still in time, quickly send it over. Yu Duan said to Zhang Ming, little Taoist, come with me. Zhang Ming wanted to reject him, but seeing that he had good intentions, he thought about it again. He wanted to find his master, but in this vast sea of people, where would he find him? If he could get help from the Marquis residence, it would be more convenient, so he nodded. The guard was surprised and asked, who is this? Yu Duan said, this demon was not killed by me alone. Without this little Taoist, it would be difficult to succeed. So I have to bring him along. The head servant said, Brother Yu wants to recommend this person to Marquis Rong? Yu Duan did not answer, silently agreeing. Both of them knew that Marquis Rong usually recruited strange people, so this was not considered breaking the rules. After muttering for a while, he said, we came in a hurry and did not prepare any extra horses. Please bring the demon's corpse with you. Otherwise, if the young Marquis were to blame us, we would not be able to bear the consequences. After saying this, the 2 of them rode away, not giving them a chance to speak. In a short while, they were far away. They did not get any benefits, so they were still a little unhappy. So they used this opportunity to embarrass Yu Duan and Zhang Ming, so that they would feel better. Yu Duan snorted and said, this place is about 7 to 8 miles away from Marquis Rong. Although it is not far, if we rush there, we would still have to drag the demon's corpse. Thinking about it, we would be in a difficult situation. Zhang Ming asked, Brother Yu, it seems that Marquis Rong cares a lot about the demon's corpse. Yu Duan said, the demon's corpse can be made into bows and arrows. If we sell it to other provinces, we can get some food and cloth. In these chaotic times, it is more useful than gold and silver. Zhang Ming grunted. This explanation made sense. The demon's bones were unusually tough and were suitable to be used to make weapons. But deep down, he felt that there were other uses. But this was an opportunity. If he wanted Marquis Rong's help, he would have to show some of his abilities. He said, Brother Yu, don't worry, I have my ways. He took out a yellow talisman. This talisman was an inferior talisman that could be thrown away easily. It was used when practicing Dao techniques. He had about 10 of these talismans with him. They were not magical weapons, but they were enough to cover a few miles. He tore the talisman and rolled half of it into a ball. He threw it into his mouth and swallowed it. Then, he passed the other half to Yu Duan and said, Brother Yu, please swallow this talisman. Yu Duan was stunned, but he saw that he had already swallowed it. Without any hesitation, he also stuffed it into his mouth. However, he didn't feel that it was difficult to swallow. When it came in contact with his saliva, it melted and flowed down his throat. As soon as it entered his stomach, he felt a wave of heat rising from his back. In that instant, his body felt as if it was filled with inexhaustible strength. Zhang Ming laughed, Brother Yu, how can we make it in time? Yu Duan laughed. He walked out a few steps and pulled the demon bird onto his shoulder. He said, Little Daoist, come with me. The two of them greeted Elder Yu and walked quickly, as fast as the wind. Almost 10 miles. In less than half a minute, they had arrived. At this time, they saw a dozen carriages lined up in front of them. Before they could get close, they were stopped by a dozen soldiers on horseback. They shouted, Who are you? Yu Duan hurriedly went forward and told them the reason for their visit. That person coldly said, Wait here. He waved his hand and a soldier came forward, took the demon's corpse, and turned around to go in. After waiting for an hour, the soldier finally came out and whispered a few words into the man's ear. Then, he threw a badge to Zhang Ming and said, If you two have any family members, you can go to the back of the camp tomorrow. This is not a place for you to stay for long. Go quickly. Yu Duan was delighted. Although he did not see Marquis Yu, this result was not bad. Zhang Ming was a little disappointed, but he could accept it. If there was no chance this time, then next time would be good. The two of them did not know that the carriage camp was currently enveloped in an oppressive atmosphere. Marquis Rong sat in the carriage with a gloomy face. He said, Did you find out? The leader of the guards said, Lord Marquis, there are claw marks and bamboo tokens on the demon's body. It should be a scout under the Lone Eagle King. We must have been targeted. This subordinate deduces that in a few days, more demons will come. Yang Tong's face paled. He said with a trembling voice, What should we do? What should we do? Oh right, hurry up and drive the carriage. With those commoners behind, they should be able to eat their fill. They won't chase after us. The guard did not speak. Marquis Rong snorted and scolded, Shut up. He knew very well that compared to the old and the weak, the demons preferred strong and healthy people. Their group was more likely to be targeted. He could only think of a way to deal with it. He calmed himself down and asked, Lord Zhu, the bird demons are coming. How confident are you that you can stop them? Leader Zhu said, If there are a few dozen, this subordinate can still manage. But if there are 100 or so, it will be difficult to deal with. Yang Tong said in disbelief, Good food, good drink, and you 300 people. In the end, you still can't deal with 100 demons? Leader Zhu said calmly, Young Marquis, those demon birds can fly. If we encounter them, we can only try to force them away. It will be difficult to hurt them. Yang Tong said angrily, I heard that someone could kill one today. How come you can't do it? Leader Zhu was not angry. He looked at Marquis Rong. This subordinate just now heard of this. This person may have a secret technique. Why don't Marquis invite him over to ask? Marquis Rong said decisively, pass on my orders. Invite that Taoist here. Leader Zhu bowed. This subordinate will go personally. He lifted the curtain and left. Zhang Ming and Yu Duan had just returned when they were caught up by the people of the manor. They were then respectfully invited to Marquis Rong's carriage. After entering the carriage, Marquis Rong looked at him and cupped his hands. How should I address this Taoist? Zhang Ming bowed. This Taoist's surname is Zhang. Marquis Rong nodded. I have invited Taoist here today because there is a matter that concerns the tens of thousands of people here. Zhang Ming's expression turned solemn. What is it? Marquis Rong immediately ordered Leader Zhu to tell him about the demon's attack. In the end, he asked, does Taoist have a solution? Zhang Ming thought for a while. This Taoist might be able to help. Hearing that he had a solution, Marquis Rong was excited. But he did not show it on his face. What is it? Zhang Ming said, this Taoist just now, the soldiers in the camp have strong bows in their hands. This Taoist has a talisman that can transform divine power. Drinking talisman water can increase one's strength and will. When the time comes, we can shoot with the big bow. He paused. If Marquis Rong doesn't believe me, this Taoist can demonstrate. Floating astronomy. Chapter 9:14. If Marquis Rong had any other ideas, he would not lower himself. He was here to seek advice from Zhang Ming, a Taoist of unknown origins. Although he still had some doubts about this, seeing how confident Zhang Ming was, he was a decisive person. He waved his hand and said in a low voice, there's no need to demonstrate. Don't doubt the person you use, don't use the person you doubt. I heard that Taoist priest killed the demon in order to save a life. I trust you. Zhang Ming raised his hand and bowed. Thank you for your trust, Marquis. But to be safe, I need to prepare some things. Marquis Rong said, everything in the carriage camp, if you need it, you can take it. He turned his head and instructed his subordinates, give this Taoist an empty carriage for him to rest in. The steward beside him said awkwardly, all the carriages are occupied, there's nothing left. Marquis Rong said impatiently, there are only 7 or 8 carriages, the rest are just bottles and jars. We're here to avoid danger, what's the point of keeping them? I'll throw them all away. The steward did not dare to speak again. He bowed and went to make arrangements. Zhang Ming bowed and said, I'll go make talismans now. Marquis Rong said, then I'll have to trouble you. Yang Tong waited until Zhang Ming left before saying, Father, do you really believe him? If it was 100 years ago, the Taoist sect might still have some power, but how can there be any wise people now? Marquis Rong snorted. What can I do if I don't believe him? Do you have a way to ensure the safety of the sect? Yang Tong was speechless. After Zhang Ming left, Marquis Zhu followed him out. He said, Marquis Rong asked me to protect the Taoist, you can tell me what you need. Zhang Ming agreed and listed out all the items he needed. Zhu Manor leader could tell with a glance that the items were not difficult to find. In less than a moment, everything was prepared. Then, he set up a big pot in the middle of the camp and started cooking. Zhang Yan stood by the side and ordered his men to throw in the medicinal herbs from time to time. After cooking it for a night, he took out a talisman and threw it in. Another hour passed. He said, that's settled. Marquis Zhu, everyone put it in a water bag and drink it before you meet the enemy. It had miraculous effects. It's just that you can't use it more than once a day. Lord Zhu did not believe it. Could such an inconspicuous little talisman help them fend off the demons? Zhang Ming saw the doubt on his face and took a few steps back. He said calmly, Zhu Manor can give it a try. The head of the Zhu family cupped his fists and apologized. He picked up a wooden dipper and drank it in one gulp. In an instant, he felt his entire body heat up and his limbs become strong. It was very different from the medicine that stimulated blood and qi. He clenched his fists and took a big bow from his subordinate. With a light pull, a creaking sound was heard as the bow was pulled to a full moon. He was shocked. This bow was made from the muscles and bones of demons. Usually, it was only used to train his strength. Being able to draw half of the bow was already good enough. He was immediately convinced. He cupped his fists and said, "Taoist master, I have underestimated you before. Please don't blame me." Naturally, Zhang Ming did not mind. He returned the courtesy and said, "The Zhu family appreciates your words." The leader of the Zhu residence had something to rely on, and immediately arranged for his subordinates to come over and fill the water. By the time everything was ready, it was already dawn. The carriages did not dare to stay any longer and continued their journey. After traveling for a short while, the sky gradually brightened. At this moment, a bodyguard with good eyesight pointed and said, "Chief Zhu, look over there." The leader of the Zhu residence looked over and saw a few black dots in the sky flying towards him. His heart sank, knowing that the demons had really come. He shouted to his subordinates, "Drink the talisman water." Following his order, the 300 bodyguards immediately took out their water pouches and drank. Then, they shouted a few times in unison and raised their bows to wait. Yu Duan and the other strong soldiers split into groups of 3 to 5. They stood beside the bodyguards and pointed their spears at the sky to provide cover for the demons. The bird demons looked like they were still far away, but after a while, they were already above their heads. However, the defense here was tight and they could not find a chance to attack. They could only circle in the sky. Zhang Ming saw that these bird demons were very organized and couldn't help but look at them a few more times. With this look, he discovered something. He raised his hand and pointed at one of the bird demons. He said, "Leader of the Zhu residence, look at that demon. It seems to be their leader." The head of the Zhu residence looked in the direction he was pointing at. Indeed, it was different from the other bird demons. Its feathers were brighter and beautiful. He immediately drew his bow and took a slight aim. Then, he loosened his finger and felt his hand shake. There was a muffled hum next to his ears. The bird demon had already fallen. The demons lost their leader and were in chaos. The head of the Zhu residence saw this and was overjoyed. He hurriedly ordered his bodyguards to shoot at the sky. One by one, the bird demons fell from the sky. Before they could even land, more than half of them were dead or injured. The remaining ones screamed in fear and ran back. After all of them had retreated, the head of the Zhu residence was in disbelief. It had only been 100 breaths' time, but he had defeated hundreds of bird demons. Normally, he wouldn't even dare to think about it. Only when he heard the cheers around him did he come back to his senses. However, he did not let the joy get to his head. He suppressed the excitement in his heart and shouted, "Do not let your guard down. Continue to be on guard in case the demons attack again." Everyone's heart skipped a beat. However, with the results just now, they were filled with confidence and were no longer as fearful as before. In the next half a month, with Zhang Ming's help, although the bird demons attacked many times, they were all defeated by the bodyguards of the Ho residents who drank the seal water. There were very few casualties among them. Because of this, there were more and more people following the carriage. Rong Ho also valued Zhang Ming more and gave him many good things. However, the latter did not need these things and rejected them all. He only mentioned that he wanted to find his master. Rong Ho naturally agreed. Yu Duan was also promoted to a soldier and was given the qi cultivation technique. Together with a bowl of medicinal soup, his strength increased greatly in a few days. He could not be compared to before. He was very proud and came to find Zhang Ming to show off his skills. However, he saw that Zhang Ming did not seem to be in a good mood. He couldn't help but ask, "Little Taoist, did I do something wrong?" Zhang Ming shook his head and said, "It has nothing to do with Big Brother Yu. I was just thinking, this technique works so quickly. If everyone can use it, they wouldn't be forced into such a state by the demons." Yu Duan said, little Daoist must be joking. This is the foundation of the survival of the people. If we give it to them, who would listen to him? Zhang Ming said, but I heard from old man Yu that the demons are rampaging and see the people as food. At this time, do we still need to worry so much? Yu Duan laughed and said, until the last moment, who would give their favorite things to others? Even if they die, they would still hold on to it. Zhang Ming lowered his head and thought. He sighed and said, that's true. Yu Duan looked at him and said, little Daoist, don't think too much. Dalu City is the golden capital of the north. There are tens of thousands of soldiers stationed in the city. They seem to be the bodyguards of the Ho residence. When you get there, you can settle down. Little Daoist, aren't you looking for your master? Maybe you can meet him there. Zhang Ming nodded and smiled, then I will thank Big Brother for your kind words. For more than 10 days. The carriages were calm and peaceful. There were no attacks from the demons. It seemed that they would reach Dalu City in another 4 to 5 days. Everyone revealed a relaxed smile. At this time, old man Yu's wife, Lan Gu, gave birth to a son. The Yu family has another descendant. He was overjoyed. But Zhang Ming felt his heart was heavy, as if something bad is going to happen. He looked at the sky and hoped that he was just thinking too much. Another 3 days passed. During this time, Zhang Ming was meditating in the carriage when he suddenly heard the sound of flapping wings coming closer and closer. He couldn't help but widen his eyes. He lifted the curtain and jumped out of the carriage. However, the scene that entered his eyes caused his breathing to stagnate. The sky was filled with densely packed black silhouettes. It looked like there were at least 1,000 bird demons flying over. The night sentries in the carriage camp also reacted quickly. They hurriedly blew their whistles and all the personal guards got up and picked up their weapons. Just like before, the elite soldiers gathered together and pointed their spears at the sky. But just as they got into formation, suddenly there was a sharp whistle in the sky. Zhang Ming's head buzzed and he almost lost his balance. He looked at the guards and saw that half of them had fallen. At this moment, the flock of birds in the sky parted, and a demon general came out. It looked like he had already transformed into a human form, but he still had a pair of wings on his back. He revealed a sinister smile, and with a shake of his body, thousands of feathers flew out. Each of them was as fast as arrows, and the soldiers below were caught unprepared. Immediately, dozens of people were nailed to the ground, and those who didn't die let out miserable howls. Yu Duan's eyes widened as he collapsed to the ground. His chest was riddled with bloody holes and he was spitting out mouthfuls of blood. He turned his neck with great difficulty as if he wanted to look elsewhere. Zhang Ming saw this and exclaimed, Big Brother Yu. Yu Duan looked at him and opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. But he couldn't. He twitched a few more times and stopped moving. Zhang Ming's heart twisted, and a burst of anger ignited in his chest. He bent down, grabbed the stone, and threw it into the air. At the same time, he felt something warm in his chest. It was as if there was a surge of qi flowing into his body. The rock that he threw actually made a sharp sound. There was a loud bang and the demon general let out a pitiful cry. After a while, the demon birds retreated like the tide. But there were a few that didn't go far and were left circling in the air. With this opportunity, Zhu Fu's leader ordered the carriages to retreat to the side of the forest. He took a look and found that in this short period of contact, more than half of the bodyguards were dead or injured. Zhang Ming was a little depressed. He thought that he could rely on the talisman water to get through this. But he didn't expect that the demons, which numbered in the thousands, could easily destroy the situation he was trying to maintain. At this time, someone hurried over and said, Priest Zhang, Marquis Rong wants you to discuss some matters. Zhang Ming nodded and followed him to the carriage. He sent a message and was immediately called in. At this moment, Marquis Rong's eyes were bloodshot. Seeing him arrive, he said in a hoarse voice, Daoist priest, I heard that you injured that demon and forced it to retreat. However, Zhu Manor's leader said that it hasn't gone far and will return soon. Does Taoist priest have a way to repel it? Zhang Ming was silent for a while, then sighed, just now, I was lucky to injure the demon leader. But if it comes back again, I have no way. Marquis Rong's heart sank. Is there really no way? Zhang Ming only shook his head. Yang Tong suddenly jumped up and pointed at Zhang Ming. It's all because of you, it's all because of you. If you hadn't defeated that bird demon and lured us bodyguards to kill it, why would so many demons be attracted here? Marquis Rong stepped forward and kicked Yang Tong, saying, disgraceful thing. His face became incomparably ferocious. Gritting his teeth, he said, it won't be that easy to kill me. Zhu Fu's leader, pass on my orders. Gather firewood and oil everywhere. If that demon comes back, set it on fire for me. Set it on fire. Zhang Ming's heart trembled. This was a dense forest. Once it was set on fire, it would be able to temporarily repel the demons, but they wouldn't be able to escape. He wanted to speak, but seeing Marquis Rong's crazed expression, he knew that persuasion would be useless. He bowed and retreated. Marquis Rong didn't care about him anymore. He didn't even look at him. After Zhang Ming left, he walked to the front of his father-in-law's carriage. He must have heard of Yu Duan's death by now. He couldn't bear to see him grieve, but after some hesitation, he still lifted the curtain and entered. But when he entered, he was startled. He saw his father-in-law sitting calmly in the carriage, as if waiting for him to come. He took a deep breath and said, Uncle Yu, we can't stay here for long. I have a way to hide and bring your family out. Elder Yu smiled. Little Taoist, I know you have the ability to get out. Zhang Ming hurriedly said, now is not the time to talk. Elder Yu raised his hand to stop him from speaking. He sighed. How many more days can I live? Even if I save them, it would be a waste of food, and it would be a burden to you. Why don't you take Lan Yang and Wen and leave? When the little girl beside him heard that she was going to be sent away, she cried and chased after Elder Yu's sleeve, saying, Grandpa, Wen don't go, Wen don't leave Grandpa. Elder Yu's eyes were filled with love. He caressed his granddaughter and solemnly cupped his hands, saying, Taoist Zhang, I'm counting on you. Chapter 9:15. Zhang Ming wanted to persuade him again, but Elder Yu only shook his head and said nothing. Zhang Ming looked at his calm expression and knew that he had made up his mind and couldn't be forced. He sighed and picked up Shang, who was still crying and throwing a tantrum, and said, Uncle Yu, I will go pick up Lady Yu and her son later. I will definitely bring them out safely. Uncle Yu, take care. Elder Yu nodded his head in relief and saluted him, thank you for your trouble. Zhang Ming was afraid that San Er's voice would attract attention, so he gently caressed her neck and the little girl fell into a deep sleep. When he got out of the carriage, he looked left and right and saw the soldiers walking back and forth, all of them looking tense. Many of them were already preparing to pile firewood and pour oil. It was obvious that Marquis Rong was waiting for the demons to attack and was about to set fire to the forest. He knew he had to hurry, so he quickly walked to the side of the female carriage. There were originally more than 30 guards here, but just now that the situation was critical, they were all transferred to the outside to defend against the demons. They didn't know if they were dead or alive, only a few people who looked like stewards were nervously guarding with wooden sticks in their hands. They recognized Zhang Ming and saw that he was carrying a child, so they didn't stop him. Zhang Ming saw that there were 3 carriages here, but he didn't know which one belonged to Lady Yu, so he asked, Lady Yu, where are you? A weak voice came from the carriage on the right, is this Priest Zhang? Zhang Ming walked a few steps to the front of the carriage. Because it wasn't convenient for him to enter, he said softly from outside, Lady Yu, the demons are strong and the situation is critical. Elder Yu asked me to fetch you and your son and quickly leave this place. Madame Yu's voice carried a hint of weakness as she said, how can I leave in my current state? You don't have to worry about me, just send my son to Delu City and hope that he can live a peaceful life. Towards the end, her voice was choked and she started to sob quietly. Zhang Ming tried to persuade her, Lady Yu, how can your son be born without a mother? It's fine for me to bring one more person, don't hesitate, we can't stay here any longer. Lady Yu heard that his words didn't sound like he was comforting her, and her spirits rose slightly. Her voice trembled. Is priest serious? After all, she could live. No one was willing to die for real, not to mention that she still had a newborn son that she couldn't bear to part with. Zhang Ming's voice was steady as he said, I really have a way. Lady Yu, please believe me. Yu Furen was silent for a while before replying, it's just that it's inconvenient for me to move around. I can only trouble you, Taoist priest. Zhang Ming saw that he agreed. He heaved a sigh of relief. He said, then forgive me for being rude. After waiting for a while, he lifted the curtain and entered. He saw his wife lying on the couch. She had a headscarf wrapped around her forehead and a thick blanket wrapped around her body. There was originally a maid serving her by her side, but she had long since left. The baby was sleeping soundly on the side of her face. Excusing himself, he took out a red brush and quickly sketched the talisman on the inner wall of the carriage. As he moved, a cloud of smoke gradually enveloped the carriage. At this time, he suddenly heard a sharp bird cry from outside, as well as the sound of flapping wings. He knew that the bird demon was attacking again, so he hurriedly increased his speed. After he finished drawing, he felt slightly tired. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and went outside. He took out a water bag and fed it to the two horses. After a while, it seemed like someone shouted a few times. From several directions, thick smoke billowed out. The camp was in chaos. There were people running and crying. Zhang Ming ignored them and took out a talisman from his pocket. He lit it up and pointed at it. With a bang, the talisman turned into a ball of spiritual fire and floated in front of the horses. When the two horses saw the fire, it was as if they were attracted by something. They neighed and kicked their hooves, chasing after the fire. Wherever Zhang Ming's hand pointed, the fire would flutter in that direction. Zhang Ming drove the carriage out of the forest. Lady Yu's voice came from inside the carriage. She asked anxiously, Priest, where is father-in-law? Why isn't he coming with us? Zhang Ming said quietly, Uncle Yu is determined to die. He doesn't want to go with us. There was silence in the carriage. Zhang Ming sighed. If he had his master's abilities, he wouldn't have to do this. He would be able to protect the people here. But when he thought of this, he was puzzled. His master should have reached this mountain, but why didn't he come to find him? Or could it be that his master was powerless against this demon? He was flustered. He felt that this was the truth, but deep in his heart, he didn't want to believe this answer. Just as he was lost in his thoughts, his vision brightened. He was outside the forest. He looked up into the sky and immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. The sky was densely packed with bird demons. There were many times more of them than just now. Just now, there were more than 10 demon generals that he had injured. Luckily, the talisman was there to cover him. The carriage and horses hid their tracks and sounds. They ignored him and ran away smoothly. Even so, after escaping danger, his back was full of cold sweat. If he were to travel according to the usual route, following the forest and the river, then heading north on the official road, it would only take him 3 to 4 days to reach Joy City. But he didn't dare to take the main road. Fortunately, he had the help of talismans. The carriage passed through the forest as if it was flat ground. After 4 to 5 days, he arrived at an open area. He gradually saw people here, but they were also refugees. Seeing that he had a carriage and a horse, they came to him. In a day, more than 100 people gathered. After asking around, Yang Kai learned that these people were fleeing from ancient Yang City in the east. 2 days later, he saw a boundary stone with the words, Le County written on it. A middle-aged scholar was sitting next to the stone. His clothes were tattered and he looked dejected. Zhang Ming got down from the carriage and walked forward. He bowed and asked, Mister, may I know how to get to Delus City? He repeated the question twice before the man finally responded. He raised his eyes and smiled bitterly, Joy City? What Delus City? 5 days ago, Delus City was destroyed by the demons. His words immediately caused an uproar. The surrounding people all revealed looks of disbelief. Someone's face turned red as he ran to the front, pointed at him and said, "You! How can you spread rumors and create trouble here?" The middle-aged scholar sneered and said, "I'm spreading rumors and causing trouble. I was originally a scribe under Marquis Li's tutelage. 5 days ago, a great demon invaded. Marquis Li led over 10,000 elite soldiers out of the city to defend against it. Who would have thought that with a single breath, the city would collapse and Marquis Li would die on the spot? Over 10,000 elite soldiers were routed and in the end, only half of them managed to escape." Hearing his words, the man was stunned. Then he took a few steps back. He shouted, "I don't believe it, I don't believe it. 10,000 elite soldiers couldn't defeat a demon. You must be talking nonsense." "Yes. You must be talking nonsense." The scholar looked like he wanted to say something. However, he suddenly gave up. His face was full of sorrow as he let out a long sigh. He sighed and said, "Demons can control spells. No matter how strong the personal guards are, they are still mortals. How can they fight against them?" The man was stunned for a while. Then he seemed to lose his strength and sat on the ground. Cries could be heard from the crowd. They came all the way to Delus City to seek refuge. They thought they could find a safe place to stay. But they didn't expect it to be a dream. The middle-aged scholar couldn't bear to see them like this. He said, "I will point you to a place. Go to the northeast. There is a high hill called Heaven Descending Slope. It was the former capital of the previous dynasty. All the civilians and soldiers went there. You can also go there." Zhang Ming said, "The wilderness is full of demons. It is not peaceful. Why don't official Lin go with us?" The middle-aged scholar seemed to be struggling for a while. Then he nodded. The descending heaven slope was not far from where they were. Under the guidance of the middle-aged scholar, they walked for 4 hours and saw a tall mound. Below it were sections of the city wall that had collapsed a long time ago. Now, the bottom of the mound was filled with refugees. Because this old city was located on a plain, Zhang Ming's vision was unobstructed. With a glance, he estimated that there were at least tens of thousands of people gathered here. At this moment, there were a few people dressed in official robes outside the city, leading soldiers to maintain order and distributing porridge. There were no more corpses on the road. It was obvious that someone had been assigned to collect them. This meant that there were still officials maintaining order in this area. The situation was better than what he had expected. The middle-aged scholar saw it too. He smiled bitterly and said, "Luckily, the demons don't eat rice, so the grain in the warehouse was not lost. Otherwise, with so many people here, they would have starved to death before the demons came." At this time, a group of soldiers passed by. They were all wearing heavy armor. They had short blades on their waists and bows and arrows on their backs. They wielded large axes and long spears. Wherever they passed, dust was stirred up. There were only a few hundred of them, but they had the momentum of 1,000 soldiers. The middle-aged scholar pointed and said, "These are the elite soldiers of Marquis Li. I wonder if there are more than 1,000 of them." Zhang Ming looked for a while and said, "From what I have seen, the guards of Marquis Rong's estate are much stronger." The middle-aged scholar said, "Joy City is the capital of a county. Of course, the guards of Marquis Rong can't compare to them." "Wait, Marquis Rong?" His expression changed as he asked, "Didn't you come from ancient Sun City?" Zhang Ming said, "They are just passers-by. I came from the west. When I heard that Xing Rong City was destroyed, I came to Joy City." The middle-aged scholar asked anxiously, "When did this happen?" Zhang Ming thought for a while and said, "I don't know the exact time. It should be about half a month ago." The middle-aged scholar's forehead suddenly beaded with sweat. He took a branch and drew 4 city outlines in 4 different directions, and then drew out the roads along the way. He murmured, it should have been 15 days ago. On the 16th day, the Gushan city was conquered, and on the 17th day, the ancient Sun city was conquered. These 3 cities attacked almost at the same time. His hands suddenly stopped and he threw the branch away. He looked up to the sky and let out a long sigh. This demon is really cunning. It is like herding a flock of sheep. He wants the people to gather in Joy City so that they can drown them in one fell swoop. His face was full of tears as he looked at the people rolling down the slope. He sighed and said, "The common people have done no wrong. Facing such a great disaster, just watch, in a few days, the demons will eat everyone in this world." Eat everyone in the world? Zhang Ming was shocked and said, "Officer Lin, what do you mean?" The middle-aged scholar smiled bitterly and said, "Don't you know? Out of the 8 counties in this world, there are still traces of people in my county. As for the other 7 counties, they have been ravaged by demons for more than 10 years. Perhaps, the area below Euphoria City is the place where all the people have perished." Chapter 9:16. Zhang Ming was incomparably shocked. He had never thought that in this so-called celestial mountain, the people of the world had already reached such a state of destitution. According to Scribe Lin, the world's population had already been reduced to 9 out of 10. The remaining people were struggling at death's door, barely managing to hold on to a corner of the land. Even a small storm could drown them. At this time, he unconsciously thought, could it be that Master was really not here? If not, why did he not come out to help? Could it be that he was only focused on pursuing the path of celestial cultivation, so he turned a blind eye to this? With his ability, if he did not try to be brave and hid deep in the mountains, it would not be difficult for him to avoid this calamity. However, he asked himself in his heart if he did not do anything and did nothing to help those who were dying, he could not. For a moment, his emotions were in a mess. Scribe Lin saw that his expression was not good and said, "Little Taoist, don't think too much. This world is like this, how can it be changed by human strength? But before you die, you must think of a way to eat your fill." At this point, he could not help but touch his shriveled belly. Even though there was no shortage of grain here, it was only porridge and thin soup, not enough to satisfy his hunger. Zhang Ming came back to his senses. Even though his body was strong, these days he had been hiding from place to place and had not eaten much. Now that he heard him mention it, he also felt a little hungry. He said, "Official Lin, I still have some food in my carriage. Please wait a moment, I will go get it." Scribe Lin said happily, "Then I will benefit from Taoist this time." Zhang Ming went to the carriage and took some dried meat wrapped in oil paper. Then, the 2 of them leaned against a low wall and ate. Not long after they sat down, they saw Lady Yu get out of the carriage with a bamboo basket in her hand. Zhang Ming stood up and said, "Lady Yu, it is freezing outside and your body is weak. Why did you come out?" Lady Yu walked in front of the 2 of them. She lifted the cloth covering the bamboo basket and revealed a small jar of wine. She said, "Just now when Taoist came, you forgot. I have some wine here. You too can take it and drink it. It will also help to ward off the cold." Scribe Lin cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, lady. There is meat without wine, it is not good." Zhang Mingqi said, "Why is there wine beside madam?" Lady Yu said sadly, "Uncle loves to drink, but Gong Gong was afraid that he would cause trouble when he drinks, so he ordered me to keep it elsewhere. Before this, I had been hiding it in the carriage. We were in a hurry on the way here, so I did not throw it away." Zhang Ming thought of Yu Duan's death and felt a little sad. He consoled her, "The dead are gone, Lady Yu, please take care of yourself." Lady Yu said, "Thank you, Dao Zhang, for your concern. I understand. Both of you, please enjoy yourselves here. I will return to the carriage first." Scribe Lin brought the wine jar over and opened the seal. He took a whiff and said in surprise, "It's actually the finest Zhen Suxiang. Who is this lady?" Zhang Ming sighed and recounted what had happened on the road. When Scribe Lin heard that the entire family was now left with only an orphan and a widow, he couldn't help but sigh. He picked up the wine jar and drank a few mouthfuls in one go. Then he lifted his sleeve to wipe the corner of his mouth and said with a smile, "I don't know if this demon will be able to eat this rotten meat of mine." Zhang Ming looked at him and said, "Official Lin, you don't seem to be afraid." Scribe Lin chuckled and said, "The past cannot be admonished, the future can still be chased. Death awaits either side, so why worry? In this life, I have always acted according to the will of others. I have lived my entire life as a yes man and had no choice. Now that I am here, I can finally be the master of my own house." When Zhang Ming heard this, his heart was moved. Yes, master often said to follow his heart. Where master is, what he does, that is his business. Why should I bother? Everything I do, I only need to follow my own heart. Once he thought it through, it was as if some shackles had been removed from his heart. He stood up and asked, "Official Lin, I wonder who is in charge of the city now. Can you bring me to meet him?" Scribe Lin put down the wine jar and asked cautiously, "What does Dao Zhang want to do?" Zhang Ming said, "I am skilled in talisman arts, which can increase the power of the army. I also have a way to block that spell." When Scribe Lin heard this, he was even more excited than he was. He jumped up and grabbed him, saying, "Really?" Not waiting for Zhang Ming to reply, he laughed again and said, "At this time, who cares if it is true or false? If Dao Zhang is willing to help, then it is for the best. Come, I will lead you there." The two returned to the carriage and, under Scribe Lin's guidance, went into the city. After traveling for half an hour, they arrived in front of the ruins of a high platform. There were hundreds of tents around it, and outside, there were soldiers holding swords at their waists. They looked at the people on the road with vigilance. The carriage stopped in the distance, and Scribe Lin had just jumped down from the carriage when one of the guards recognized him. He shouted, "It's Official Lin, Official Lin has returned." His voice was filled with joy. Zhang Ming looked at Scribe Lin. This Official Lin's identity might not be as simple as he had said. Not long after, he heard the sound of footsteps from inside, and then he saw a group of people hurrying out. The leader was a young man wearing a brocade robe and a tall hat. When he saw Scribe Lin, he hurriedly came up and bowed. His expression was slightly excited as he said, "Teacher, you have returned. I have been looking for you for a long time." Scribe Lin sighed and said, "Young Marquis, as a teacher, I am ashamed to face you." The young man said in a low voice, "Father's matter was not teacher's fault. Teacher does not need to blame yourself." Scribe Lin was about to speak again when an attendant at the side said, "Official Lin, now it is time to call you Marquis." He couldn't help but be startled, and then he nodded his head. With Marquis Li's death, this eldest son naturally inherited the title. He solemnly bowed and said, "Marquis, I am Lin Mujie." The young man held him up and said, "Teacher, there is no need to be like this. Although Li Shugong inherited the title, he is still teacher's student. Now I need teacher to teach me how to deal with this." Scribe Lin smiled bitterly and shook his head. He said, "Marquis, there is nothing I can do in this situation. But this Taoist beside me is an expert in talisman techniques. He originally cultivated in the deep mountains. A few days ago, he brought a mother and son and broke out of the encirclement of thousands of demons. He is truly capable." Only then did everyone notice Zhang Ming beside him. Seeing that he was only 14 or 15 years old, they were somewhat skeptical. But Marquis Le did not doubt Scribe Lin's words at all. He solemnly bowed to Zhang Ming and said, "For the Taoists to be able to come out of the mountains at this time of the world's destruction, it is enough to show that you are a person who cares for the common people. Li Shugong will first thank you on behalf of the people of the county." Zhang Ming returned the bow and said, "Marquis is too kind. When the nest is overturned, there are no eggs that remain intact. I do not wish to become food for the demons." Marquis Le nodded and said with a smile, "That is natural. I have just inherited the title and naturally do not wish to live in the belly of the demons. I am even more reluctant to part with my beautiful wives and concubines." As soon as he said this, everyone unwittingly smiled. The solemn atmosphere around them eased a little. Marquis Lu said, "What does the Taoist need to cast the spell? I will send someone to prepare it." Zhang Ming did not stand on ceremony and listed the items he needed. Someone beside him noted it down and then handed it to him for inspection. After checking that there were no mistakes, he said, "I need 3 days to cast the spell. Do not come and disturb me during this time. Otherwise, it is very likely that all our previous efforts will be wasted." 3 days, Marquis Lu slowly nodded and said solemnly, "Within 3 days, no one will disturb the Taoist." Marquis Li's subordinates worked very quickly. In more than 2 hours, they had gathered all the items Zhang Ming needed. He then asked for a large tent and ordered people to move the items inside. Then, he chased everyone out. At this moment, in the large tent, there were hundreds of neatly cut bamboo slips. Zhang Ming clearly remembered that Euphoria City was breached due to the demonic power. Before that, Le County had relied on the strength of the elite soldiers to hold on for more than 10 years. This meant that as long as he could think of a way to resist the demonic power, with the strength of Euphoria City alone, it was not impossible to defend this last remaining piece of land. He composed himself and sat in front of a table. He took out a stack of talisman papers from his bosom and lit a fire to burn them. Then, he collected the ash and sprinkled it on the inkstone on the table in front of him. Then, he took out a dagger and cut his finger. He squeezed his blood into it and mixed it together. Then, he dipped a brush in it and took out a bamboo slip. Finally, he wrote on it. This was using his own blood as a guide to trigger the power of the talisman. Once it was activated, the effect would be doubled. However, this method was extremely damaging to one's vitality. In his memory, his master had repeatedly warned him to be extremely cautious when using this method. Otherwise, if he was not careful, his life would be in danger. However, other than this method, he could not think of any other way to restrain the demonic power. If he could save tens of thousands of people, he was willing to lose his life. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Zhang Ming worked day and night and finally drew the talisman on the hundreds of bamboo slips. At this moment, although his face was pale and his eyes were lifeless, his heart was gratified. With this scroll, he could defend against the demonic power. He pulled himself together and went out of the tent. However, the sun was blinding his eyes and he felt a little pain. He quickly lowered his head and passed the bamboo slip to a person waiting by the tent door. He said in a hoarse voice, "Send this to the Marquis. When the soldiers go to battle, they only need to recite it." However, the person did not reach out to receive it. He sighed and said, "It is a pity that Taoist has put in so much effort." However, in the current situation, even if you can defend against the power of the demonic power, you will not be able to turn the situation around. Zhang Ming was shocked when he heard this. At this moment, he saw the face of the person beside him. "Official Lin?" He asked anxiously, "What is going on?" Scholar Lin sighed and said, "Taoist, go outside and take a look. You will know." Zhang Ming pushed him away and stumbled out of the tent. He looked out and saw that outside the mountain city, there was a sea of demonic power in the sky and on the ground. For a moment, there was an uncountable number of them. The bamboo slips in his hand fell to the ground. Just like the demonic power, even without using any power, it was enough to drown these tens of thousands of people. Scholar Lin came to his side and smiled bitterly, "Man proposes but God disposes. What can we do?" Zhang Ming looked outside and thought to himself, "That's right, the heavens are like this, and no man can change it. Could it be that teacher knew this would happen, and thus didn't help? Could it be that I really did something wrong?" He suddenly turned around and walked down the stage. Scholar Lin said, "Taoist, where are you going?" Zhang Ming did not even turn his head, as if he did not hear. Scholar Lin shook his head and looked down. He said to himself, "Isn't it the same everywhere?" On the heaven-following slope, tens of thousands of people were surrounded. Looking at the demonic power surging in from all directions, everyone showed a look of fear. Zhang Ming walked in the crowd, confused. At this moment, he heard a young child's voice. "Father, Mother, I am scared." He turned around and saw a middle-aged couple holding him tightly in their arms. "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. Father and Mother are here. Don't be afraid, Nan." He looked around again and saw that the people around him were either trembling, screaming, numb and motionless, or kneeling and begging for mercy. At this moment, a scholar said sorrowfully, "The sky is high and wide. Why can't we be accepted? Why can't we be accepted?" His voice was heart-wrenching, each word weeping with blood. "Yes, the sky is high and wide. Why can't we be accepted?" Zhang Ming muttered it twice, and then his footsteps paused. He said to the sky, "This world can't go on like this." As soon as he said this, something in his mind was triggered. With a loud bang, an inexplicable force suddenly burst forth. When he raised his head again, a divine light suddenly bloomed in his eyes. At this moment, Zhang Yan's true consciousness had awakened from his doppelganger. Chapter 9:17. Zhang Yan's real body woke up, and everything that happened to this body after entering the continent was clear to him. With a thought, the demon-subduing slip suddenly shook, and the majestic essence energy formed from the bodies of the sky demons poured into his body with the force of a dam bursting. First rank of spirit contract, second rank, third rank, his magic power rose, and in a few breaths, he had reached the great perfection of the fourth rank. At this point, the devil's slip seemed to want to push this cultivation method down, but it was blocked by his origin consciousness, and was forcefully suppressed. His real body had not entered the grotto heaven, and it was not the time to go up. But the moment he gathered his magic power, he released energy into the sky, and his breathing shook the ground. Be it demons or mortals, everyone felt their legs become unsteady, and they all fell down. In an instant, he was the only one left standing. He looked around, and with a grab, he caught a bird demon in his hand. There was no spiritual opportunity in Donglai continent, and mortals could not cultivate. But this person could turn into a demon, wasn't that strange? He gathered his energy in his eyes, and focused. In an instant, he saw through everything from the outside to the inside. The reason why this demon could reach this stage was because there was a thread of extremely weak and weird energy in its body. This energy could activate vital energy and true essence, and use spiritual opportunity to drive it. It could suppress mortals here. But to this demon, this was not a blessing, but a curse. Because of the pressure and blood being squeezed out, after a year and a half, this demon would definitely die. At that time, all of its energy would be taken, and it would return to the person with that energy. First, he would use the demon to kill and swallow the energy. Then, he would take it for his own use. Such a method reminded him of the Chua dragon that was imprisoned here. This demon was not like the other demons that were suppressed. It did not have the ability to stir up trouble, and its fighting abilities were not strong. However, there was a heaven-bestowed supernatural power. Even if one's body was reduced to ashes, as long as there was still a strand of essence left in the world, one could create demons and create chaos. After absorbing enough essence, one could gradually recover. Zhang Yan thought about it carefully. The chaos in Donglai continent happened hundreds of years ago. Most of the demons in the 3 western continents had escaped in the past 1 or 200 years. The timing matched. He sneered and casually threw the bird demon to the ground. He looked at the demons below the slope. He took a deep breath. A trace of scarlet purple flashed between his brows. Then, he exhaled and let out a clear shout. Boom! The sound of this shout. Like a clap of thunder in a clear sky, brilliant and impressive, a gust of wind appeared out of nowhere, like a raging inferno, rushing down the slope. Countless fiend demons below looked as though they had been crushed by rolling stones. Blood spewed from all 7 orifices and their tendons and bones were shattered. The bird demons in midair had their wings snapped and fell like rain. When the sound of the wind dissipated, all the demons in the sky and on the ground had died under his shout. For a moment, the world was silent. Zhang Yan raised his head and looked at the sky. Although Donglai continent did not touch the roots of the earth, it had mountains, rivers, and earth veins. Moreover, it was in the real world and the small world, so there should be spiritual opportunity. Yet, he could not feel it at all. There had to be a reason for this. He relaxed his mind and followed the direction of the spiritual opportunity. After a long time, he finally felt the abnormality. It was not that the spiritual opportunity did not exist, but that it was being robbed. The source of all of it was actually on the outer continent restriction array. This array had been in operation for tens of thousands of years and covered the land of the continent. It needed spiritual attachment to exist, and as such, it needed to fight for spiritual opportunity with the people in the continent. Coincidentally, this array followed the path of emotionlessness. It only took and did not care about anything other than itself. Even if the spiritual opportunity in the continent was cut off and the living beings were in trouble, it had nothing to do with it. Zhang Yan knew that there were Taoists in Donglai continent. They probably left because they could not compete with the array. He turned around and looked around. He did not expect that these tens of thousands of people were the only people left in this continent. Although there were demons in this continent, humans were spiritual beings. There were people who took the blood of the demons and used it for themselves. If it could be passed down, there would be a chance for them to survive this disaster. However, this method was only used by a small number of people and did not benefit the people. Hence, when it came to the end, it was still difficult to solve the problem. Thinking about this, he could not help but sigh. This disaster is not something you can overcome. However, if everyone in the world has a way to protect themselves, how can we allow the demons to wreak havoc? At this moment, someone suddenly knelt down and kowtowed, saying, "Priest, please teach us." The few people behind him also came to their senses and knelt down, saying, "Priest, please teach us." As if they were infected, the tens of thousands of people on the slope knelt down like the wind blowing the wheat, shouting for the method. At first, it was chaotic, but not long after, it was loud enough to shake the sky. Zhang Yan heard the unwillingness, anger, struggle, pain, and other emotions in the voice and was slightly moved. He looked towards the horizon and thought back to what he had experienced in the 3 continents. There were some similarities and differences, but everyone in this world suffered from weak spiritual opportunities. The West Sink continent could be said to have weak spiritual opportunities. The West Sink continent could be said to have weak spiritual opportunities. The West Jew continent could be said to have broken spiritual opportunities. As for Donglai continent, it could be said to have exhausted spiritual opportunities. If he created a method that did not focus on spiritual opportunities and did not need the help of others, he could just adjust his breathing and refine his own energy to enter Tao. What would happen then? As this thought rose, his heart shook. When I entered Tao, I saw that the path of cultivation was controlled by xianmen and aristocratic families. I once said that if I were successful in my cultivation, I would think of a way to change this situation. Since I entered Tao, my heart has not changed, and my determination still exists. When I create a method, I will open another door for those who wish to enter Tao, and pass it on to the future. Therefore, my Tao is not my Tao alone. It is the Tao of tens of thousands of people, the Tao of millions of people, the Tao of all sentient beings in the world. As he thought about this, he faced the many pairs of expectant eyes and opened his mouth. If the heavens don't want you to wait, I will. If the heavens don't want you to wait, I will. If the heavens don't want you to wait, I will. As he spoke, his voice pierced through the clouds and shook heaven and earth. Rumble. He raised his head and looked up. Thunder clouds gathered in the sky, and after a short while, rain started to fall. At this moment, he was enlightened and touched the secrets of the heavens. In that instant, he understood what Tao he was pursuing. A mysterious feeling came out of nowhere. It was reflected in his mind. At this moment, he felt like there were countless waves pushing against his back, urging him to move faster. It was as if as long as he took this step, he would be able to enter the grotto heaven realm. However, at this critical moment, he ignored the external disturbances and did not move. Even if this path was opened, he had the heart but no action, the flower bloomed but no fruit, and it was not perfect. At this moment, he took a step forward. He would collapse halfway, and in the future, it would be hard for him to step onto the path. He needed to finish it well, to deduce this technique, only then would his heart be able to respond to the Tao. To achieve the true Tao. Before this, there was still one more thing he had to do. He looked down the slope. He saw that among the corpses of the monsters, there was an energy whirlpool floating up and charging into the sky. It flew down and left behind a sentence, "The monsters and demons are not all gone, I need to kill them. Wait for me to return." After saying this, he rose up, turning into a streak of light and followed the energy. After flying for a day and a night, he saw that the threads of energy came from all directions, gradually gathering into one and drilling into a dry well underground. He looked at it for a moment, then lowered his body and went down as well. After a few thousand feet, he reached the pit. In front of him was a 10 feet tall dark hole that led deeper. He followed along the path and saw that the cave walls were smooth and had no edges. It twisted and turned like a snake's cave, but it wasn't tight at all. After a few miles, he stepped into a huge stone cave. There was a 1,000-foot-long reflective wall that was as bright as a mirror. Within it, there was a hornless dragon swimming about. It was just 3 feet long, its body was white and warm like it was carved out of jade. At this moment, it was swallowing the energy that floated in. As it swallowed and spat out, one could see a drop of blood rolling around its body. Each time it did one round, its body would swell up a little. It seemed to have sensed Zhang Yan's arrival and stopped. It stared over with its red jade-like eyes and asked, "Who is here?" Zhang Yan said loudly, "Qinsang Zhang Yan, I am here on orders from Timing Ancestor to take you in." Chuolong came to a sudden realization and said, "I was wondering why my energy was so lacking. So it was you who spoiled my plans." As he spoke, he shook his head and sighed. "What a pity, what a pity. If you came a year later, this body of mine would have been able to soar out of here. At that time, your entire sect can forget about finding me." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Even if you leave this continent, if you continue to torture the living beings, then even if I don't take you in, others will come to subdue you." Chuolong laughed and said, "Eliminate the weak and preserve the strong, this is the heavenly Tao. All living beings in the world should be food in our mouths, yet all of you are meddlesome. Don't you think it's a sin?" Zhang Yan sneered. "According to what you said, I'm strong while you're weak, so I'm acting according to the heavenly Tao by annihilating you? In that case, you should just accept your death obediently." Chuolong could not help but choke. He snorted and said, "There's a saying in the world, the winner takes all. Even if you win today, I won't argue with you. However, this is not the end of the game. We'll meet again in the future." As he spoke to this point, his originally vigorous aura actually weakened bit by bit. In Zhang Yan's eyes, he could see that the spiritual vigor around him was leaving his body quickly. That part of his body had become dim and dull, like a beautiful jade that was slowly turning into a piece of stubborn stone. He knew that the demon knew that it could not defeat him, so it dispersed its own energy. However, it was not nonsense when it said that they would meet again in the future. Just now, when he came in, he had already seen that the demon's vitality and energy were not here, so he could not take its life today. This entanglement would probably drag on for hundreds or even thousands of years. He thought about it. If Tai Ming Patriarch had the intention back then, it would not have been difficult for him to find Chuolong's vitality and not kill it, as he purposely left it for the younger generation to deal with. After all, suppressing and annihilating the 5 demons was also a way to achieve the middle technique. If it was obtained too easily, it would be difficult to prove this technique. However, he could not do this, and it was impossible for him to look at this place all the time. The best way was to do what he had thought previously, to pass down a technique to inspire the people to rise up and then kill this demon. At this moment, he saw that there was still a strand of blood remaining in the body. He had an idea and reached out to grab it. This blood was condensed by Chuolong, and it could be considered as the blood of a sky demon. However, at this moment, it had already lost its spiritual essence, so it naturally did not have any magical effects. However, he thought about how the Tsang dragon's remains were now missing. If it was obtained by a great demon, it would be a disaster. Chuolong was the son of the Tsang dragon. If he obtained this drop of blood, he might be able to find its whereabouts. He took out a jade bottle and kept the blood in it. He shook his sleeves, and in an instant, wind blew under his feet, and he flew into the sky. Chapter 9:18. Forest Upper Plains, Shuntian Slope. The heavy rain continued for 2 days and 2 nights, but it still did not stop. Ever since Zhang Yan left, Luo had led a group of officials to wait here, not leaving even half a step. One of the officials could not help but say, "My lord, we do not know when the celestial master will return. The weather is cold and the rain is bone-chilling. My lord, please take care of yourself. Why don't you go back and rest? I will wait here for you." Luo shook his head. "If I don't do this, how can I show my sincerity?" Scribe Lin walked up and said, "That's right. My lord cannot leave this place." The official's expression was unhappy. "Official Lin, my lord has been fighting the demons for days and is already exhausted. If he does not rest now, I fear he will not be able to bear it." Scribe Lin's attitude was unyielding. One who travels 100 miles is only 90 miles. Since my lord has made up his mind to wait, how can you leave halfway? The official was a bit angry and raised his voice. "Since official Lin says so, then I might as well ask a question. If that immortal master doesn't come in a month, will we have to wait for a month? If he doesn't come in a year, will we have to wait for a year?" Luo heard this and was a little shaken. If he knew when the celestial master would return, he would be willing to wait as long as possible. But as the official had said, if he really did not return for a few years, what should he do? If he was an idle person, it wouldn't be impossible. However, he was a marquis of a county. After the great calamity, there were still many things to arrange. If he wasted his time here, he would probably be delayed. Scribe Lin saw that he was tempted and hurried forward. He grabbed his sleeve and said sternly, "If others want to leave, they can leave. But my lord, you must not leave even half a step." The officials were shocked by his actions and began to reprimand him. "Official Lin, what are you doing? How rude! How rude! Let go of me." "Official Lin, calm down. How can you be a teacher like this?" Scribe Lin did not care. He did not care at all. He only stared at Luo and said, "Celestial Master Zhang's thunderous roar must have killed half of the demons in the world. When the celestial master returns, pass it down. My lord, you can gather the troops. Tidy up the country. After that, he would exterminate the demons and restore the land of the 8 counties, bringing prosperity to the world. For the sake of millions of people, what does it matter if the marquis suffers some rain?" Luo was silent for a moment before he sighed. "Exterminating the demons and re-establishing the dynasty has been my father's lifelong ambition. Fortunately, immortal Master Zhang has taken pity on me. My path will never end. Teacher's words are reasonable. I will wait here." Scribe Lin said, "Exactly. If there's anything here, you can leave it to us officials to handle. Marquis, please wait here for the immortal master to straighten out the people's hearts." Luo nodded repeatedly. Scribe Lin was afraid that he would be swayed again, so he pointed down the slope. "Marquis, please look." Luo turned his head and saw tens of thousands of people at the bottom of the slope. At this time, not a single one of them had left. Everyone had a look of anticipation on their faces. His heart trembled. Ever since the chaotic world began, everything he saw was lifeless and apathetic. But now, it was different. He took a deep breath and said, "I understand. Teacher, please be at ease. If the immortal master does not return, I will not leave the slope." Scribe Lin was satisfied. He let go of his sleeve and said, "If that's the case, the officials can rest assured. Fortunately, they did not have to wait for too long. After another day, layers of clouds could be seen coming from afar. Among them, there was a dazzling golden light that flickered incessantly. When it reached the top of the crowd, it turned into a wisp of pure white air and descended onto the slope. Then, they saw a Taoist with fluttering robes walking out. Lu Hou was excited. He quickly went forward and knelt down. He said, "Commoner Li Shugong welcomes the immortal master." The officials behind him and the tens of thousands of people on the slope also knelt down and kowtowed, calling out, "Immortal master." Zhang Yan looked up and said, "Lu Hou, please get up. Since I said that I would pass the technique to you, I will definitely keep my word." Lu Hou bowed and wanted to stand up. But he was indeed tired from the past few days. Although he was young and strong, he could not bear it. He had just stood up when he collapsed again. The servants beside him saw this and hurriedly came forward to support him. However, they were pushed away by Lu Hou and shouted, "Move aside, I will do it myself." As he said this, he gritted his teeth and stood up. Zhang Yan glanced at him and stretched out 2 fingers to point in the air. Lu Hou's body trembled, and then he felt a warm current surging through his body. The fatigue that he had accumulated over the past few days disappeared, and his body felt lighter. How could he not know that he had received benefits? He immediately bowed deeply. He said, "Thank you, immortal master." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. With another flick of his finger, a golden talisman flew out and floated down. He said, "Keep this item well." Lu Hou hurriedly caught it. Just as he was about to ask what it was, he saw a series of techniques flash before his eyes. He was stunned on the spot. Zhang Yan had not started on creating techniques yet, so the one he gave did not involve cultivation. Instead, it talked about how to boil the corpses of dead demons into medicine and blood soup to strengthen one's inner yuan. If an ordinary person were to consume it, not only would they live longer, they would also have the ability to fight against demons. It was 10 times, no, 100 times better than the crude techniques that the mortals had come up with previously. But because this technique was obtained by killing demons, once all the demons in the world were eliminated, it would naturally be useless. However, the Donglai continent still had the Hui dragon to deal with. This battle would last for a long time. It was likely that he would have to wait until he created a new technique before he could change it. But at that time, he would not only teach it to the person in front of him. He would pass it down so that everyone here could hear it. Lu Hou comprehended for a while and finally came to his senses. He bowed deeply to Zhang Yan and said, "Thank you, immortal master, for the technique." Zhang Yan pointed to a large mountain in the distance and said, "Where is that?" Lu Hou could not answer. Scribe Lin stepped forward and said, looking at the direction, "That should be Green He Mountain." Zhang Yan said lightly, "This mountain is tall and beautiful. It can be used as a cave. If you are in danger, you can come here to find me." When he finished, he waved his sleeves and rode the wind, disappearing into the clouds. Lu Hou and the others did not want him to leave just like that. They hurriedly bowed and sent him off. When he was out of sight, they slowly got up. Lu Hou looked at the golden talisman in his hand. After thinking for a while, he raised his hands and sent it to Scribe Lin beside him. He said respectfully, "Teacher, please take a look." Scribe Lin was a little surprised. He looked at Lu Hou and saw that he was sincere and not faking it. He thought for a while and then took it. After reading it, he did not say a word. Then he passed it to someone beside him. That person was a little hesitant but could not resist the temptation. He reached out and took it. His face was both disappointed and glad. He thought for a while. He also passed it to another person. In the end, including Lu Hou, there were a total of 12 people who had seen it. Lu Hou stepped forward and took each person's hand with one hand. He said, "The ways of the world have deteriorated. I alone cannot hold up the sky. From today onwards, I will rule the world with you all." The 11 people looked at each other and did not move. Scribe Lin shook his sleeves and was the first to step forward. He said, "Your humble subject accepts the order." Seeing this, everyone came to their senses. They stepped forward and bowed. They said, "Your humble subject accepts the order." At this time, an old subject said, "Unfortunately, although the method imparted by the celestial master is exquisite, I have not heard of the legendary method of immortality." Scribe Lin chuckled and said, "I think this method is very good. If that kind of method needs to be cultivated for years and is time-consuming and laborious, when can the Marquis realize his ambitions? As for the method of immortality, do you all want to abandon the celestial master and enter the mountains to enjoy the wind and dew?" Everyone shook their heads. Scribe Lin said in a low voice, "That's it. Moreover, the celestial master has his own considerations for bestowing the method. It is not something we can comment on. Please speak less in the future." Everyone suddenly felt a chill and nodded in agreement. Scribe Lin breathed a sigh of relief. In fact, there was one thing he did not say, and that was that these demon corpses were in the hands of Lu Ho and the other powerful subjects. This way, they could maintain the original hierarchy, and they could smoothly raise the army to fight against the demon. But if it was a method that everyone could obtain and learn, perhaps after a long time, the hearts of the people would not be satisfied. Before that demon could be completely eradicated, the music would break down and there would be internal strife. Only the current situation was suitable. Zhang Yan left the obedient slope and flew south. Not long after, he arrived at the foot of the Green He Mountain. He stopped for a while and looked for a suitable place. He landed on the ground and used his mana to open up an abode. Then, he sat down in the abode. He already knew what the road ahead was. Next, it was time to think about how to proceed. He created this method to prove himself and not to force the people of the world to enlighten. It was using his own heart to replace the people of the world, and his own desires to become the desires of the world. This was a disadvantage. Those who have the heart will enter, those who have no heart will leave. Those who are fated will be content, and those who are not can give up. He was not the parents of the people of the world, so there was no need to force the cause and effect on his own family. After the people of the world obtained the method, what they should do and where they should go would have nothing to do with him. In other words, once this method was created, he would be able to obtain the method. Even if there was only one person in the world who practiced it, it would not hinder his path of Tao. However, this method did not rely on external objects and did not rely on spiritual opportunity. If the people of the world could use this to achieve Tao, who in the world would want to enter the mountain to be apprenticed to? How could the aristocratic families of the Xian men control external objects? This method of breaking the roots and digging the grave, once it was thrown out, it would cause a huge uproar in the world. When that time comes, whether it was the master or the disciples, the aristocratic families would want to kill him first. He could imagine how many wise men and sages from the past to the present had the same intention. However, they probably all saw this point and did not dare to take a step forward. However, he did not need to worry about this point. Not to mention that his cultivation was not enough to deduce a method that could directly enter Tao. Even if he did, he would not throw it out in one go. He thought to himself, with his cultivation level, to be able to deduce the method to the stage of opening the meridian, so that the people of the world would no longer be blocked by the jade elixir essence pool when they entered Tao, it was already not bad. As for after entering Tao, to move up, one would still need to rely on spiritual opportunity and external objects to move forward. But even so, it was not without calamities and tribulations. He felt that the people of the world were being bullied by the demons and withered away. That was why he was enlightened and decided to create a method to prove himself and help others. However, as the saying goes, what is good is strange, what is good is evil. Although this method made it easy for people to enter Tao, but once it was spread out, who knows how many cultivators in the world would increase. When this generation came, they would definitely rob the external objects and fight with this cultivator for spiritual opportunity. Looking at the source of the chaos in Donglai continent, it was the big continent's prohibition array and the people fighting for spiritual opportunity. One could imagine, if this method appeared in the world, it would not be benevolent and kind, but it would definitely cause endless killing. It was as if he could already see the mountain of corpses and the sea of blood behind it. Until one day, when he had a glimpse of Tao and completed this wonderful method, he would be able to eliminate it. And he, the person who created the method, would definitely have to face all sorts of tribulations along the way. However, after receiving benefits, he would also have to bear the karma. This was his own Tao. How could he retreat in the face of danger and not do anything in the face of difficulty? Others did not dare to, but he dared to. Thinking about this, he smiled and threw away all distracting thoughts. Holding the jade remnant in his hand, he closed his eyes and meditated. His mind slowly sank into it. Chapter 9:19. East Hua Continent, Floating Heavenly Palace, Daylight Hall. A golden light flashed, and 3 people appeared in the empty space in front of the hall. The one in front was a middle-aged cultivator with broad shoulders and a narrow waist. His hair was tied up in a bun, and his eyebrows were high. He had a short and thick beard, and he looked very capable. Behind him was a young man dressed in Taoist robes. He had a delicate face and a spiritual aura. However, his eyes were lively, and he seemed to have a lively personality. The middle-aged Taoist walked to the door of the hall and called out to Daoren, who was on duty on the stone lotus throne. Perfected Cultivator Chen. Daoren opened his eyes and looked around. He purposely looked at the young man for a moment and sighed. He waved his hand and said, "Go in. Hall Master Hua is waiting for you." The middle-aged cultivator bowed and called out to the young man who was still looking around curiously. He led the young man into the hall. The young man felt that they were already far away, so he asked softly, "Senior brother, is that Daoren a member of the Chen clan?" The middle-aged Taoist said in a deep voice, "That has nothing to do with you. When you're here, remember to speak less and do more." The young man chuckled and said, "Senior brother, Master doesn't have so many rules." The middle-aged Taoist sighed and said, "Do you know how great of an opportunity it is for you to become a disciple of Perfected Cultivator? I'm limited by my talent, and I'm only an in-name disciple. You must cherish it." When the young man heard this, he quickly retracted his smile and said seriously, "Little brother understands." The middle-aged Taoist was satisfied when he saw that the young man did not want to brush him off. The two walked for hundreds of steps and saw an endless flight of stairs that extended into the clouds. They did not know where it led to. The middle-aged Taoist sped up and arrived at the bottom of the stairs. He bowed and said, "Hall Master, I've brought Sui Yanzhan here." A deep voice came from above. "Order him to come up." The middle-aged Taoist turned and said, "Junior brother, Perfected Cultivator is calling for you. The enlightened being is calling you. Follow this staircase and remember the method of circulation that I taught you. You can go up now." The young man nodded and was about to greet his master whom he had never met before. He also felt a little uneasy, but he did not dare to be careless. He followed the mental cultivation method that the middle-aged Taoist had taught him, and after circulating it a few times, he walked up the stairs. He had thought that the stairs were just a little long, but now that he had taken the first step, he realized how difficult it was. He felt as if a heavy burden was suddenly pressing down on his body, and every step required him to use all his strength. He could only grit his teeth and persevere. Fortunately, there were no obstructions along the way. After an hour, he successfully reached the top of the stairs, but his whole body was exhausted, as if he had been fished out of the water. At this moment, he looked up and saw a Taoist sitting in the hall. The Taoist was dressed in a golden robe and had a jade ruler in his hand. His body was surrounded by golden rays. One moment it was like a blazing sun, the next moment it was like a golden blade. He knew that this was his teacher, Hua Xian, the side hall master of Qinsang School's Daylight Hall. He hurriedly knelt down and paid his respects. "Disciple greets master." Hua Xian said, "You're able to pass the ascending heaven steps, so it's obvious that you've put your heart and soul into practicing the method passed down by master, unlike the previous people." The young man was bold, and he asked curiously, "May I ask master, where did those people go?" Huoxian said expressionlessly, "This place is full of spiritual vigor, and not a normal person can stay for long. If you neglect your homework, you'll naturally be invaded by external qi. You'll die from having your meridians broken." The young man was shocked, and only then did he know that just now, the Guan Yuan was so dangerous. He wiped the cold sweat off his forehead, and he could not help but feel glad that he had been taught the method. He cultivated diligently every day, and there was not a day that he slacked off, unlike those unlucky people. Huoxian shook the jade ruler in his hand, and a few spiritual lights flew down. He said, "I'll give you 2 talismans, one for self-defense, and the other for flying. You can cultivate this method first, and when you reach the Xian light realm, I'll give you another method." Ever since he became the son-in-law of the Qin clan, although the Qin clan allowed him to take in many people to teach him Tao, these people were all disciples of the Qin clan, and there was no master-disciple relationship between them, so they were not considered his disciples. Therefore, after cultivating for hundreds of years, he did not have a single disciple. However, for cultivators, other than those who believed that they could enter Tao, which one of them was not afraid that there would be no one to receive them when their lifespan ended? Therefore, after he took charge of the side hall of the Daylight Hall, he had the idea of taking in disciples. Although he was distancing himself from the Qin clan, he was still from an aristocratic family, and Jinren Qin was still alive, so it was not appropriate for him to do so. However, half a year ago, Jinren Qin was reincarnated, and he no longer had any scruples. He picked a few talented children from the Frost Manual to teach them. However, to protect the reputation of the Qin clan, he only ordered them around in name, but in reality, they were no different from his direct disciples. When the young man received the talisman and the method, he immediately took it out. Seeing that he could point at it with his mind, the talisman naturally responded, and it flew and spun. Huoxian was only interested in his talent, and he did not care if his action was rude, so he said, "From now on, you will cultivate here. You can walk around the outside of the hall, but there is another world inside the hall. However, with your cultivation level, you cannot enter yet." When the young man heard this, he could not help but feel a little disappointed. He rolled his eyes and asked, "I heard that there are 3 halls in the Heavenly Palace, Upper Pole, Duzhen, and Daylight. Can the disciples of the other 2 halls go there?" Huoxian said, "Although Zhang Yan, the master of the side hall of the Duzhen Hall, is on good terms with me, he is currently traveling outside and is not in the hall. You don't have to go there if you have nothing to do. As for the Upper Pole Hall..." As he said this, his body suddenly trembled, and he stood up from his seat. He looked in the direction of the Upper Pole Hall. He saw that in the sky, there were clouds and water. It was surging, and it was surging. However, in the Longyuan swamp, it was as if there was an elephant hiding in a cave. The waves were rolling here and there as if they were boiling. The sky and the water resonated with each other, and they were ready to jump. He could feel that there was a surge of spiritual vigor stirring in the heaven and earth. Even his body was shaking, and he could not stand steadily. He hurriedly used his ruler. He activated the prohibition in the Daylight Hall, and then it stopped. At this moment, not only him, but the people in the various grotto heavens of the Qingsang school were also startled, and they all looked at the strange phenomenon. After a while, a loud and clear voice was heard. "The Longyuan hangs upside down, the tide rises, and the water flows for 3,000 years. The clear waves wash the sun and moon, and the water in the sky is equal to the heavens." As the voice rose, a 10,000 feet waterfall rose from the sky, and it went straight up until it connected with the sky, and it controlled the sea of clouds. At this moment, the sound of water surging could be heard everywhere in the Donghua continent. If one looked up to the north, he could also see the heaven-connecting Xian water in the north, and the water was so thick that it could control the 4 seas. Huoxian was stunned, and he said, "Senior brother Qi has entered the grotto heaven." However, at this moment, there was a sound of jade cracking, and the clear sound spread out in all directions. He was surprised, and he turned his head to look. In the southern sky, there was a cluster of stars rising. The light was spinning, and the aura of treasures was like a wheel. The sound came from the south, and the brilliance fell on the world. Its momentum was so great that it actually did not lose to the water form. His expression froze. It was actually another Dharma. He couldn't help but think, there was such momentum in the south, and there were stars passing through the sky. It was very likely that someone from Yuxiao school had also achieved the grotto heaven. In the upper extreme hall, Sun Jinren and Meng Zhen sat on the high platform, and they were both looking far south. Meng Zhen looked for a moment, and said, among the younger generation of Yuxiao school, only Zhou Yong and Wu Fenggu could achieve it in these 100 years. However, this kind of starlight, and the appearance of dancing heaven and earth, it must be the Zhou family's heavenly universe realm Tongshu. This person is without a doubt Zhou Yong. Sun Jinren laughed coldly, and said, after Yuntian achieved the grotto heaven, this person also stepped into it. How can there be such a coincidence in the world? He could have entered this door a long time ago, but he purposely waited for Yuntian to enter before stepping out. Moreover, his momentum was still flourishing. This is to tell the world, the next generation of our two sects, that Yuxiao is superior to us, Qinsang. Meng Zhen said in a deep voice, this is not surprising. Yuxiao had the intention to lead Xianmen before the previous generation's master of Lingya ascended, and it was simply stopped by our fourth generation's master. Looking at it now, they might not have given up on this idea. Jinren's son said coldly, Senior Marshal Brother, you are speaking like a gentleman. Why would the Zhou family want to lead the Xianmen? It's obvious that they want to monopolize the spiritual opportunity and turn the 9 continents into their own territory. It's just that the world situation is dictated by us, Qinsang and Shaoqing sects, and the Devil's sect is watching from the outside, so they can't do it. I dare to say that their heart is not dead, and their thoughts are not dead yet. Meng Zhen said indifferently, the spiritual opportunity has no owner, and those who are capable can control it. If they have the intention, then let's see how capable they are under the 3 tribulations. Yuxiao School, Department of Defense, Xian Ming Grotto Heaven. Zhou Ruiying looked at the bright spiritual light on Mo Chiu Cliff. It was as brilliant as brocade, and he could vaguely see the 8 stars in a row. He was both envious and praised. Marshal Nephew Yong is worthy of being personally taught by master. His foundation is deep, incomparable to others. She turned to the dressing table, and with a wave of her sleeves, an illusion appeared. She said, Senior brother, Uncle Master has made a clever move this time, allowing Marshal Nephew Yong and Qi Yuntian to achieve success together, just in time to reduce Qinsang School's prestige. The illusion in the mirror laughed, in my opinion, Uncle Master's move is unnecessary. Although Qinsang School seems to have lost a great deal of power, since that internal strife several hundred years ago, many outstanding people have died. Their vitality has not yet recovered, so why disturb them first? Zhou Ruiying frowned, isn't senior brother looking down on Qinsang School? Qi Yuntian has already obtained the method. If it wasn't for Jinren Chen reincarnating several years ago, I'm afraid it would have become like the 12 grotto heavens again. I'm afraid it will return to the situation of the 12 paradises in the past, standing above all the other sections. When Sect Master Qin took over, I thought that the Yutsang sect would never be able to recover. Who would have thought that in just a few hundred years, it would become like this again? The illusion in the mirror said disapprovingly, Junior sister, at present, apart from Meng Zhida's profound cultivation base, Yan and Zhu only rose up by relying on Master's kindness. Even if Sun Ji Yan has some ability, his cultivation base is not enough, so there's no need to fear him. Furthermore, among the aristocratic families of Qinsang School, after the war in the past, the Su family only existed in name, and later on, the entire family was annihilated. The survivors have been suppressed by Qin Mabai for the past few hundred years, so it can be said that their morale is gradually declining. Now that Qin Taiping is dead, Du, Shao, and Han can only bury their heads and go into seclusion. Moreover, there's still the Yan family master and disciple that haven't been eliminated. It can be said that there's internal strife and external trouble. It's far worse than when Qin Qingang was in power, so there's no need to be so afraid. Zhou Ruiying said, but let's not talk about these people, there's still Shen Baishuang, Qi Yuntian, and that Zhang Yan. The illusion laughed out loud and said, but our Yuxiao also has Zhou Yong, Ruying, Wu Fenggu, these kinds of talents, which are not any weaker than Qinsang school. Moreover, if the previous plan succeeds, I'll borrow the essence from Qin family, which can at least delay that Zhang Yan's path for 300 to 400 years. When the time comes, he might not be able to keep his life. Junior sister, don't worry. Chapter 920. In Donglai continent, more than 100 years had passed since Zhang Yan's incarnation entered Mount Qinghe to cultivate. After Lord Lu received the teachings of Zhang Yan's incarnation, he trained his troops and attacked the demons. The next year, he regained control of the entire province and established a dynasty. However, at this time, there were demons gathering outside the continent to fight against the imperial army. Due to a moment of carelessness, they suffered heavy losses and suffered several defeats. In order to gather people's hearts, Lord Lu received advice from Prime Minister Lin and used half of the country's resources to build a temple and a high platform in Mount Qinghe. He worshipped Zhang Yan as a virtuous celestial master and led people to worship him every year. Lord Lu reigned for 30 years and personally led troops into battle 22 times. It could be said that he spent his entire life on the battlefield. At the age of 50, he passed away due to a heart ailment. After his death, his eldest son died early and his eldest grandson ascended the throne. At this time, the Lu dynasty had already occupied 4 provinces and half of Donglai. However, after decades of war, the people were exhausted and the population was declining. They were temporarily unable to expand their territory. Thus, with the advice of a wise minister, they stopped the war and recuperated for 20 years. At this time, the Lu dynasty had 1 million households and 100,000 elite soldiers. They felt that their treasury was full and their armor was sharp. Thus, they led their troops into battle and destroyed the 6 demons. They beheaded all of them and presented them at the foot of Mount Qinghe. From then on, whenever King Lu succeeded the throne, he would come to Mount Qinghe to pay his respects and pray for good weather and for the peace of the people. Every time there was a battle, he would first train his troops at the foot of the mountain to show his determination to eradicate the demons. At the back of Mount Qinghe, the mountain path here was different from the one in front of the mountain. It was rugged and difficult to travel. At this time, there was an ancestor and a grandson walking along the steep slope. The old man was over 100 years old but was still hale and hearty. His legs were strong and he reached a rock. He held his grandson's hand and said, "Mao, you must remember, all descendants of the Yu family who come to this mountain to pay their respects to our benefactor, regardless of age, must not walk on the right path in front of the mountain. This is to show their sincerity." His grandson was only 5 or 6 years old. He nodded his head as if he understood. Mount Qinghe was high up in the clouds. It took Old Man Yu 2 days to reach the peak of the mountain. At this point, the narrow mountain path had already come to an end. There was only a wide jade staircase. There were also rows of stone tablets on both sides. All of them had names written on them. The Lu dynasty had its laws. All disciples of the imperial clan were required to pay their respects to the Shangde immortal master, or else they would not be listed in the imperial clan register. The names written here were all left by them. As he got closer, he could see more than 10 elite guards walking back and forth. Because every year people would come to this place to seek the Tao as a disciple, they were afraid that they would disturb the Shangde immortal master's peaceful cultivation. Therefore, the imperial court stationed this group of guards here. The leader of the forbidden guards sensed that someone was coming from below. He raised his long dagger axe and shouted, "Halt! This is the cultivation place of the immortal master of Shangde. If you do not have an edict, please leave immediately." Old Man, you didn't panic. He walked forward and clasped his hands together. "General Lin, greetings." When the leader of the forbidden guards saw him, he quickly put down the long dagger axe in his hand and bowed respectfully, saying, "So it's Elder Yu." Then he looked at the child and asked, "Is this Elder Yu's grandson?" Old Man Yu replied, "Yes. While I still have the strength, I brought him up to pay my respects to my benefactor." The leader of the forbidden guards stepped aside and said, I have duties to perform and can't accompany you. Elder you, please take your time. He knew that although the people of the world were indebted to the immortal master, there was only one family that could call him benefactor, and that was the Yu family. Rumor had it that their ancestor was on good terms with the immortal master. Later on, the mother and son were personally escorted by the immortal master to Dolu County. Both families had a deep relationship. The fact that everyone in the family, regardless of gender, lived a long life seemed to further prove this rumor. The current Lu king had rewarded the Yu family several times and even summoned them to be officials, but the Yu family never accepted. Old man Yu thanked the leader of the Forbidden Guards and climbed to the peak with his grandson. Among the people of the world, apart from the royal family, only the descendants of the Yu family could reach this place. He pointed at a mountain not far away that was shrouded in clouds and said, "Mao, look. That is the place where the benefactor cultivates." The child widened his eyes and looked at it curiously. Old man Yu stroked his beard again and said, 100 years ago, your ancestor was just a newborn. If it wasn't for the benefactor's protection, his corpse would have been left in the wilderness and fed to the demons. The descendants of my family will guard the temple for generations to repay the benefactor's kindness. You must remember, no matter how the world changes in the future, do not let the common people disturb the immortal master's peace. The child raised his little face and said, "Grandpa, I will guard the cave for the benefactor and prevent the demons from coming up the mountain." Old man Yu felt happy and laughed out loud, saying, "Good," 3 times. He lit candles in front of the mountain and prayed from afar. 3 days later, the candles were extinguished and the food and water were all gone. He had to go down the mountain. Before he left, Old man Yu looked at the cave and sighed. Great-grandmother, on her deathbed, still couldn't forget. She wanted the descendants of the Yu family to personally thank the benefactor and kowtow. "I'm afraid there's no hope for me in this life. I can only entrust it to Mao." He held the child's hand and sang a song in his old voice. Under the light of the setting sun, he walked down the mountain step by step. Spring passed and winter came. Another 100 years had passed. The old man had passed away long ago and the child was now white-haired and old. Just like his ancestor, he brought the descendants here to pay their respects, hoping to see the benefactor. The current King Lu carried on the legacy of his ancestor. He fought hard and finally chased the demons out to sea. He had already recovered 8 counties and acquired an island overseas, making it the 9 counties. On the day of his success, he thought that his achievements were unparalleled. He came to Mount Qinghe to offer sacrifices, just to see the face of the immortal. However, he did not get what he wanted and left with regret. Outside the Donglai continent, a dragon carriage floated in the air. This was where Zhang Yan's real body was. Because there was a breath of divine sense left in the body, he polished his cultivation day and night. It was a place where his cultivation had reached the peak of the 3rd stage. His mind had been immersed in the broken jade for nearly 200 years. If he were to calculate the time spent inside, it would have been 16,000 years. The difficulty of achieving this technique was far beyond what he had imagined. Only now did he realize that he had inadvertently stepped onto the right path by studying the erosion inscription. To achieve this technique, if one did not first understand the mysteries of heaven and earth, it would be useless no matter how much comprehension he had. When he reached the juncture, he could not take a step forward and could only sigh with regret. Even if he went back to cultivate, his Tao heart would be hard to repair and he would waste time. To do this, he must first understand the truth and understand the origin of fate. So, once he found his own Tao, he could attract the response of heaven and earth. In the broken jade, Zhang Yan's incarnation sat cross-legged on the ground. Countless erosion inscriptions floated around him. They were so dense that they could not be counted. However, as he concentrated, they gradually gathered and finally turned into 2 words. These 2 words looked simple, but a few scattered strokes seemed to contain infinite true meaning. However, it was like a broken mirror and a cracked tile. There seemed to be a place where they fit, but it was difficult to connect. It was as if only one stroke could make up for it in order to finally become one. He focused and calculated with his heart. After an unknown amount of time, a light flashed in his eyes. He suddenly raised his finger and wanted to point. However, at this moment, his movements paused. It was as if this stroke was extremely heavy. With this point, there was no turning back. In the future, even if he could really prove his Tao and ascend, he would probably be entangled with thousands of calamity techniques. If he was careless, he would die and his Tao would disappear. His soul would scatter and there would be no possibility of restarting. However, at this moment, he heard a soft ring from the Qinghong sword pill. It lingered in his heart and didn't go away for a long time. Zhang Yan nodded and smiled. Okay, with you by my side, what do I have to fear? It's just killing through calamities and grinding away all difficulties. His eyes turned to the erosion inscription and he thought, I hope that once this technique is born, all the fated people in the world can use it to enter the Tao. With a thought, he pointed it down. At this moment, a mysterious feeling surged into his heart. Without seeing, without knowing, he knew. Unclear but clear. Without understanding, he understood. At this moment, all the venerable grotto heavens in the world felt something and unconsciously looked toward the east. Zhang Yan's mind retreated from the broken jade. He slowly got up and stood with his hands behind his back. He looked into the sky and after a long time, he smiled and chanted, Don't fall into reincarnation and enter the universe. Pass the Tao in the human world. I am willing to kill thousands of tribulations with one sword and exchange the heartless for the sentient heaven. With this, all the restraints on his body disappeared and he took a step forward. Boom! The heavens and earth shook. In an instant, a wisp of mysterious chi surged out of his body and soared into the sky. It actually broke through the clouds and surged into the 9 heavens in one go. This chi covered the sky. Its appearance was chaotic, but its form was illusory. It was hidden in the clouds and was boundless. It was so deep that it could not be described with words. It was so vast that there was no way to describe it. It was unfathomable and filled the world. With this collision, the East Lai continent's restrictive formation shattered. The entire celestial mountain was shaken out of the small world and escaped into the real world. At this moment, something fell like a meteor and entered the mortal world. Under the impact of this chi, the high cloud that had shrouded the people's heads for thousands of years slowly dispersed. The stars in the sky were no longer covered and poured down from the sky. They shone on the mortal world and bathed the entire world. Once this Dharma appeared, it stood in the air. However, it circulated the 6 voids and breathed in and out the heaven and earth. With this traction, the earth's root that was buried in the depths of the earth reacted. There was a trace of spiritual vigor that extended from the spiritual veins of the mountains and rivers to the surface and broke through. Boom! This chi surged up. The west sunken continent that was far away from the extreme west was the first to bear its force. The earth shook and spiritual vigor gushed out like a spring and slowly cleared the sky. It was the same for the west sink continent and the west overlord continent. After the 3 streaks of spiritual vigor rose to the sky, they converged into one and surged towards the east. Not only that, the middle pillar continent, east flower continent, north underworld continent, south cliff continent, and the east victory continent that was out of the sea also surged with earth chi. Spiritual vigor leaked out and sped towards the sea. In the continent of the world, wherever the earth's root touched, spiritual vigor rose and finally converged like a tide. It crossed the ocean and gathered at East Lai. On the clear jade spiritual cliff of Yuxiao School, a handsome young man suddenly stood up. He looked towards the east and let out a surprised sigh. The heavenly stars respond to its power and the 9 continents support its chi. This is clearly the sign of achieving the ultimate Dharma. Whose sect is this? Chapter 921. Above the Dong Lai outer sea, a cloud of chaotic mist floated in the air. Inside, there was the sound of thunder and lightning. It looked like it had returned to the time when all living things were born. As the boundless spiritual vigor surged in from all directions, its momentum became wider and wider. It spread out and gradually covered a radius of thousands of miles. At this moment, Zhang Yan's spirit was immersed in the one profound realm. He had no idea where he was. He seemed to be awake but not awake, like he was asleep but not asleep. However, every time he thought about it, a bolt of lightning would leap across the mist. Between the spiritual opportunity, there would be airflow rolling. After an entire 365 days and a sufficient number of circulations, this ball of chaotic profound energy slowly retracted and returned to his body. Zhang Yan suddenly opened his eyes. At that moment, there seemed to be a flash of purple lightning. Heaven and earth seemed to have suddenly flashed. He stood in the air with his sleeves behind his back. He looked at the surging waves in front of him and the vast heaven and earth. He felt the surging mana in his body that seemed to be able to stir up the universe. He couldn't help but think to himself, there was a saying in the records that when one becomes a grotto heaven, one can create lightning with a thought and move the wind and clouds with a breath. It seems like it wasn't an exaggeration. In his heart, he was filled with emotions. No wonder it was so difficult for people in the world to become a grotto heaven. Not to mention the difficulty of climbing Tao, even when one became a Dharma, the spiritual opportunity didn't come out of nowhere. He had to ask for it from outside his body. This was an advantage for the big sections. For example, Qi Yuntian, Qing Qinzi, and the other direct disciples could get it from the spiritual cave. However, because of this, the normal disciples could only go to the grotto heaven to get the Qi. Even if they succeeded, they would be weaker. As for people like him, if he didn't have enough, he could borrow it from the heaven and earth. Now that he thought about it, Shen Baishuang from the sect, Jinren Shen, must have borrowed the spiritual cave. If not, it would be hard for him to achieve what he did later on. As he stepped into this realm, he naturally gained all sorts of enlightenment. Many things that he didn't understand in the past suddenly became clear. He didn't enter the grotto heaven. However, he didn't know how strong the grotto heaven Jinren was. All of them had the ability to shatter the sky and split the earth. Even if it was divine powers and magic powers, they would still be able to cover a radius of at least 1,000 miles. This was not something that Yuanying cultivators could compare with. It could be said that no matter how many Taoist cultivators there were in the grotto heaven, they could be killed with a flip of their palms. They were like ants. That was why he never acted rashly. Firstly, he cared about his own safety. He didn't want to lose the Tao fruit that he had painstakingly cultivated. Moreover, this world couldn't bear it, and it would ruin the place of cultivation for no reason. More than 10,000 years ago, the battle between sky demons and human cultivators was mostly outside the third heaven. But even so, it still caused the pillars in the center to crack and the strong clouds to cover the sky. When one reached this realm, many magical treasures would be useless. Now, once he used his Dharma, it would not be difficult for him to travel thousands of miles. Even if he could scatter it a little, what use would that be? If he didn't draw support from his own Fa Li, perhaps only a killing true weapon like the sun-embracing axe would be able to injure the enemy. Just as he was thinking about this. But he suddenly heard a clear cry. It was that clear swan sword pellet flying out. Looking up, it was completely clear and pure like glass. It seemed like a layer of dust had been removed, and one could see its true nature. This sword was connected to his mind. When he absorbed the energy of heaven and earth and evolved his Dharma, it absorbed the spiritual opportunity that surged over together. Who knew how many benefits it had obtained? That bit of true consciousness. He had already become incomparably lively and agile. Unfortunately, it was just like that. It seemed like it was still lacking a little to transform into a true spirit. Zhang Yan knew that it wasn't the right time. This clear swan sword pellet was the best of the Shaoqing sword flow. If it became real from Xian, it would definitely be a killing true weapon. That wasn't something that could be easily obtained. After entering the grotto heaven, his lifespan would be 3,000. At most, he would nourish it and refine it. Thinking about that, he had a thought and called it over. Then, he placed his hand on it and smiled. In the future, I will definitely repay you. The clear swan sword gave out a clear cry and turned into a bright light, flying into his brow. He turned his body and looked back at Dong Lai. At this moment, there was something that needed to be solved, which was that unknown Hui dragon. If this demon wasn't eliminated, then the world wouldn't be at peace. Especially now that the restriction formation had been broken and there were no more restrictions on Dong Lai continent, it might have the ability to escape. If it went to the continent, not mentioning how it would harm the people, if it colluded with the North Sea demon, then it would definitely bring disaster to the world. When he was yuanying, he couldn't find any traces of it. That was because his cultivation wasn't there yet. Now that he was in the grotto heaven, naturally he had the means to find it. He sat on the cloud and used his spiritual intent to sense. In an instant, he scanned through the mountains and rivers of Dong Lai. Most of the demons were chased away by Yu Chao. The remaining ones were scattered in the deep mountains and forests, they weren't a threat. However, he noticed that there was a large portion that was hiding in the ocean currents in the west of the continent. Most of them were water-race demons. His eyes squinted. The Hui dragon's essence energy could only be used by borrowing the power of demons. That place was most likely where it was hiding. Immediately, his technique moved according to his mind. In an instant, he went from the sky to the ground. With the momentum of 1,000 miles in a breath, he escaped to that place. In the easternmost part of Dong Lai, there were more than 100 towering cliffs on the sea. This used to be the location of a Taoist cultivation sect. However, after the spiritual vigor dissipated, it was scattered in all directions, leaving only thousands of empty caves. At this moment, in one of the caves, a white-robed scholar with sunken eyes was meditating. In his hand, he held a dragon-shaped jade pendant tightly. Ever since this person killed his senior apprentice brother 200 years ago and entered the continent, he searched everywhere for the ancestral master's treasure. However, the continent's spiritual opportunity was cut off. Although he could still fly, every time he used it, he would lose some mana. Hence, he didn't dare to use it casually. Hence, after so many years, he still couldn't find it. Until a year ago, there was an unknown change in the continent. The restriction formation collapsed and the stars appeared. Spiritual opportunity came like a tide. Although he didn't know why, he benefited a lot from the situation. Recently, he felt that the spiritual opportunity was getting lesser and it was going to return to how it was before. Hence, he thought of leaving. However, at this moment, he sensed the ancestral master's treasure. Overjoyed, he ran for it without hesitation. However, when he found the treasure, he was surprised to find that there was a strange chi of essence in it. He couldn't use it, so he had no choice but to use his technique in an attempt to refine it away. However, after a few months of effort, his mana and chi of essence were depleted, but he still couldn't succeed. Although the chi of essence in the jade pendant was stolen to reside in the treasure, there was no movement in the past. However, today, it was trembling for some reason. The white-robed scholar was shocked and prepared to suppress it. However, at this moment, a white shadow leaped out from the jade pendant. It was like an exquisite jade dragon, only an inch long. It stared at him and said, "Fellow Taoist, don't waste your energy. With your ability, you won't be able to refine me within 100 years. However, if you can promise me one thing, I can leave on my own." The white-robed scholar was bewildered and said, "What is it? Say it first." The jade dragon said, "It's nothing much. Just leave this place as soon as possible." The white-robed scholar was stunned. He then laughed out loud and mocked, "Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? The spiritual opportunity here is weak, so I can still subdue you. However, if you go to the sea where the spiritual opportunity is flourishing, won't you be like a dragon in the sea, unrestrained?" The jade dragon scoffed and sneered, "I'm not afraid to tell you that I have a pair of heads here. I'm afraid that the strange phenomenon that happened a few days ago is related to him. This person has a powerful background. If you don't leave now, I'll be in trouble, but you won't be able to escape as well." The white-robed scholar sneered, "Don't try to lie to me. Who has the ability to create such a strange phenomenon? If I really have such mana, where can I run to? Just as he said that, the sky suddenly turned dark. The sun and moon moved, and the stars dimmed. It was as if everything had disappeared and turned into chaos. Then, he was in a trance. It felt like a moment had passed, but it also felt like thousands of years had passed. When he woke up, he realized that he was in the sky and there was a handsome young Taoist standing in front of him. The person stood there like a mountain, and his chi was like the ocean. It was as if he was one with heaven and earth. One look at him would make one's mind tremble and his breath become unstable. The white-robed scholar was shocked. This breath was similar to the people in the rumors. As he thought about it, his body trembled and he did not dare to think further. Zhang Yan did not look at him. He turned to look at the jade dragon and said, "It's been 200 years, and we meet again." The jade dragon was a heavenly demon, the son of the azure dragon. It was knowledgeable. When it saw Zhang Yan, it knew that he had achieved the position of a grotto heaven. It immediately gave in and said, "Zhang Shangzhen, can you let me go? I'm willing to give up this body and only leave a strand of my soul to reincarnate in the human world." Zhang Yan said, "I know about your ability. You are born with a special species. Even if your soul reincarnates, as long as the essence you planted is not extinguished, you can find it in the future. You might be able to reincarnate again. How can I let you go? I must exterminate all of you so that the world can be stable." Chuolong's voice turned cold. "Since you know that I have this method, even if you destroy my essence, it will only destroy 200 years of hard work. As long as there are still living beings in this world, you can't kill me." Zhang Yan smiled and said with deep meaning, "Since you killed someone today, someone will come to kill you tomorrow. There is no need for I to interfere." As he finished, he gently waved his sleeve. Chuolong was not willing to die without a fight. He shouted and activated the essence he had accumulated for more than 200 years. It turned into a white light in the shape of a dragon. It soared hundreds of feet into the sky and flew straight into the sky. However, when it was halfway there was a thunderous sound in the sky. Then, a purple light flashed across the sky and hit its body. In an instant, it exploded and turned into nothingness. The white-robed scholar was terrified as he watched. He groaned inwardly. Why did he have to get involved in the battle of such people? He said while trembling, "Shangzhen, I will take my leave." Zhang Yan looked at him and said with a smile, "Wait. That Chuolong is a special species in the world. You don't even know that your essence has invaded your body. If you don't resolve it, you will be taken away in less than 100 years. When the white-robed scholar heard the conversation between the two, he knew that this demon had an extraordinary background. Now that he heard these words again, he was terrified. He quickly prostrated on the ground and said with a trembling voice, "Please save me, spiritual master." Chapter 922. Zhang Yan saw the white-robed scholar kneeling and begging, and said, "With your cultivation, the demonic dragon's chi of essence should not have been able to penetrate your body. However, you were greedy for the talisman and used normal methods to refine it, which allowed it to enter. Now that the chi of essence is entangled with you, the more you circulate it, the deeper it will enter. In the end, your primordial spirit may not be able to survive. The easiest thing to do is to abandon this body and reincarnate while there is still no harm. You can avoid this disaster." When the white-robed scholar heard this, he was shocked. Although he was already over 800 years old and his lifespan was not short, he had found the treasure left behind by the founding master. With this item, he could rightfully return to Xianzhou Palace. Not to mention taking the position of sect leader, at the very least, he could consume the great Chun divine fruit to extend his lifespan. This way, he could live for at least another 300 to 400 years. He was reluctant to give up on this chance to reincarnate, so he prostrated and begged, "Shangzhen, is there any other way?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "There is another way, and that is to kill this demon. This way, this chi will have no source and will not cause any harm." The white-robed scholar opened his mouth and said, "This demon just now said that there are living beings in the world, and they will not be destroyed. This is not something that I can subdue." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "The living beings I'm referring to aren't humans, but the demons of birds, beasts, fishes, and insects. In the Donglai continent, demons have long been banished into the sea. If you have the heart to do so, as long as you see a demon in the sea, you can go up and exterminate it. That way, the essence in your body won't act up." The white-robed scholar thought for a while. Although this method could not completely eradicate the problem, the demons in the sea were nothing to a Yuanian cultivator like him. At the very most, he could take in more disciples from overseas and do things on behalf of his master. The only thing to worry about was the decline of the mortal dynasty in Donglai continent, which caused more demons to appear on the land. However, this was not difficult. At the very most, he could try to support them. With this thought, he finally calmed down. He bowed again and said, "Thank you for your guidance, Shangzhen." Zhang Yan nodded and gently shook his sleeves, instantly stirring up a gust of wind. The white-robed scholar felt his body sway. His head felt dizzy. Looking around, he was shocked to find that in this instant, he was already dozens of miles away. At this moment, there was a loud tremor in his ears. Suddenly, the sky darkened. Everything in front of him was dark. It was as if dark clouds covered the sun. Only after 10 breaths of time did the light of day return. Gusts of astral wind swept over along with the waves. His body was blown to the point that it swayed, but he was filled with fear. If he was in the middle of it just now, he would probably be minced into pieces. While his heart was palpitating, he murmured, "The Grotto Heaven's master is indeed the Grotto Heaven's master." Zhang Yan left the ocean and headed towards Donglai continent. Along the way, he slowed down and purposely retracted his spiritual power. After all, with his current cultivation, if he used all his strength to fly, it would definitely shock the world and strike fear in the hearts of the people. But even so, his speed was not slower than when he was riding on his sword. Not long later, he arrived in front of Qinghe Mountain. He retracted the wind and clouds and landed outside the cave where his clone was cultivating. He slowly walked in and saw that his clone was sitting on top of a huge rock, not moving at all. Based on his original thoughts, after he stepped into the Grotto Heaven, he could push this clone into the 5th level of the spirit comprehending contract. Once the demon image was refined, he could take it for his own use. But now that he thought about it, he realized that there were many areas that were inappropriate. Although this doppelganger had been pushed to the realm of 4th revolution, it was forcefully enhanced by the infusion of essence qi. It was not like him, who had to circulate his cultivation at every step, so it had no foundation to speak of. It was far from being comparable to his real body. Without the essence qi of the devil's slip to sustain it, as time passed, his cultivation would gradually dissipate. Now that 200 years had passed, this clone's cultivation had already fallen to the 3rd level, just a little bit more and it would fall to the 2nd level. And this was because it was sitting still. If it used any external methods, it would definitely dissipate even faster. He thought to himself, "Now that I think about it, if I really reached the 5th level that day, let's not talk about whether or not I could control it. Just the huge amount of essence was not something this clone could withstand. 10 out of 10, the body would have collapsed. But that day was just a test, I never thought that I would succeed in one go. There will be a long time in the future, I might as well go back and read the books before I think of a plan." He pointed with his finger, and the clone was instantly shrouded in a golden light. With a shake of his sleeve, he sealed it into a talisman and kept it in. After doing this, he stepped out of the cave and looked down at the mountains and rivers. Although he had already become a Grotto Heaven, it was not time to return to Donghua. He used 200 years to open up another method to enter the Tao. He had to pass it down so that it would not go against his Tao heart. But if he used the hands of the nobles of the Lu dynasty, it would be controlled by them and he would not be able to obtain it. He had to open up another door. Thus, with a spell, several mortal clones appeared. Without needing to be taken care of, with just a thought, they went to different places to teach the Tao. These clones did not have the ability to fly, and their mana was only at the level of a meridian opening cultivator. But all of them were skilled in medicine. Wherever they went, they would save the wounded and help the dying. They spread the Tao, and gradually, they became famous among the people. But after 2 years, no one was able to cultivate it. But this was to be expected. Firstly, time was short, and everyone had not cultivated for a long time. Secondly, although this method did not rely on external objects to open meridians and break through, it did not mean that the path of cultivation was easy. In fact, some of the difficulties were even higher than normal Tao. However, there was an advantage to this method, and that was that everyone could learn it. Even if they could not succeed, they could at least relax their meridians and strengthen their bodies. Among the clones, there was one named Ru Ming. After he left the mountain, he walked and stopped along the way, and arrived at Chongping County under the rule of the Lu dynasty. This county was the 8th county in the world. Back then, the Lu dynasty chased the demons into the sea. A portion of the people in this county were the old soldiers, and a portion of them moved from the other counties. Thus, the population was not large, and after walking for a few days, he did not see anyone. That day, the sky was dark, and dark clouds covered the sky. He knew that a heavy rain was coming. He saw a deserted temple in front of him, and wanted to enter it to avoid the rain. But when he entered, he saw a scholar kneeling in front of an offering table. In front of him was a baby, and beside him was an unsheathed long sword. Hearing footsteps approaching, this person was extremely cautious. He immediately grabbed the sword and turned around. Looking around, he saw that it was a middle-aged Taoist with a horsetail whisk in his hand. Only then did his expression relax, and he put the sword back, saying, "So it's a Taoist." Ru Ming bowed and said, "I was passing by this place, and saw a temple, so I wanted to come in to hide from the rain. I hope I did not disturb you." The scholar hurriedly bowed back and said, "Taoist, you are too kind. I am not the owner of this place, I am just passing by." Ever since Zhang Yan wiped out the demons, the number of Taoists in the world has increased. These people often go into the mountains and forests to kill demons, and use their muscles, bones, skin, and blood to cultivate themselves. Thus, the demons that they killed were mostly in places that the military could not reach, and the imperial court also tacitly allowed it. Among them, the famous ones were often called into the imperial court, and thus they were respected by the people. Because the temple was narrow, the scholar carried the child and made way for Ru Ming to sit opposite him. The scholar bowed and said, "My surname is Yuan, may I ask for Taoist's name?" "My Taoist name is Ru Ming." "So it's Taoist Ru Ming." The scholar with the surname Yuan seemed to have a lot on his mind. After a few polite words, he held the sword in one hand and carried the child in the other, and did not speak anymore. Ru Ming looked at him a few times, and said in a deep voice, "I see that you have killing intent in your heart, but it is directed at this child, I wonder why." The scholar was shocked when he heard this, and the sword in his hand almost fell to the ground. After a while, he said with difficulty, "Dao Zhang actually saw through me." Then he gritted his teeth and said, "I won't hide it from Dao Zhang, this is Xiaoka's child, but Xiaoka must eliminate this evil creature today." Ru Ming frowned and said, "Even a tiger does not eat its cubs, this child looks like he is not satisfied, why do you want to kill him?" The scholar looked up to the sky and let out a long sigh, and said, "After all, he is my child, if he is not strange, how can I do it?" Ru Ming did not understand, and after asking in detail, he found out that the scholar's name was Yuan Jinping, and his ancestor was a general of the Lu dynasty. Years ago, he followed the emperor to this place to fight against the demons, and after that, he settled down in this county, and his family was considered well off. 3 years ago, Yuan Jinping married the daughter of a rich family, but not long after the wedding, he suddenly heard that the imperial court was fighting against the demons at sea, and the general was recruiting military scribes, so he was tempted. Because to be an official in the Lu dynasty, one must have military experience. He saw this as an opportunity, and after thinking about it, he entrusted his wife, who was pregnant, to his family to take care of, and he himself joined the army. Now, 3 years had passed. He took the recommendation letter, and excitedly returned to the village, wanting to show his ambition, but who knew that his wife was pregnant for 3 years before giving birth. When the child was born, there was a bright light surrounding his body. This was an auspicious sign, and his family was happy, but after a few days, all the cats and dogs in the family died, and after a month, he was able to speak, and there was always lightning flashing above the house, such an evil thing, so the family thought that this child was the reincarnation of the demon. Yuan Jinping originally wanted to give this child to Shangda Temple, but he was afraid that this matter would not be good for his family, so late at night he carried the child up the mountain, wanting to eliminate the root of the problem, but after all, this was his own child. Even though he was angry, he could not do it. After listening, Ru Ming stroked his long beard and said, "Can I take a look?" Yuan Jinping hesitated for a while, then nodded and said, "Priest, please let me take a look. If it really is a demon, then kill it, to prevent it from harming the people." He put away his sword, carefully handed the child over, and then looked at him with a nervous face. Ru Ming wrapped the horsetail whisk around the child and carried him over. He took a closer look and saw that the child was sleeping sweetly. He saw that the child's eyes were exquisite and he was full of spiritual vigor. He couldn't help but be surprised. He thought for a moment and asked, "May I ask, has there been anything strange in these years?" "Strange things?" Yuan Jinping thought for a while, and said, "There is one. 3 years ago, when the thunder shook the sky, when the clouds were broken, there was a meteor falling. At that time someone saw it fall into the city, but later when someone went to look for it, they did not find anything." When Ru Ming heard this, he looked at the child in his hand, smiled, and said, "So you are here." Floating Astronomy. Chapter 923. Yuan Jinping heard Ru Ming's strange words and asked in surprise, "Priest, what do you mean?" Ru Ming saw his nervous expression and laughed, comforting him, "You don't have to be afraid, your son has a great background, he is not a reincarnation of a demon." Yuan Jinping's eyes widened, he ignored his manners and grabbed Ru Ming's sleeve, asking urgently, "Then, what is my son's background?" The people of the Donglai continent were different from the others. For more than 200 years, they had relied on killing demons to fight for a place to live. All demons had to be eliminated. This child was so abnormal, he would also suffer when he grew up, so it was better for him to do it. But now that he heard that he was not a demon, how could he not be excited? Ru Ming's words had a double meaning, "I can't say. You are a person of the mortal world, you don't have to get involved with the karma of Xian men." Only then did Yuan Jinping realize that he had lost his composure. He hurriedly let go of his hand and took 2 steps back. He cupped his hands in apology and said, "I was rude. I just wanted to ask, how can you be so sure that my son is not that monster?" Ru Ming smiled and said, "It's okay, to be honest, I am a disciple of Celestial Master Shangda." Yuan Jinping was shocked and said, "Priest is a disciple of Celestial Master Shangda?" Virtuous and Benevolent Celestial Master was the title given to Zhang Yan by the Marquis of Lu, Li Shugong. Every time the king of Lu succeeded the throne, it would be given another title. Until now, there were more than 100 words, but the people were used to addressing him with 4 words. But everyone knew that this celestial master had been cultivating in Mount Qinghe for more than 200 years and had never come out, so where did this disciple come from? So he did not dare to believe it. Instead, he held his sword tightly. He pointed the tip of the sword at the person and asked doubtfully, "But what proof do you have?" If the person gave a wrong answer, he would stab him with his sword. He was not a weak scholar. Ever since he joined the army, he had taken secret medicines and drunk demon blood. He had also killed several demons with his own hands. Otherwise, he would not have dared to come to this deep mountain alone. Ru Ming said calmly, "I see that there is an immortal tablet of Master Shangda on this offering table. Why don't you light some incense and ask? We'll know when the time comes." Yuan Jinping looked at the immortal token on the table. He subconsciously nodded his head. He was the one who brought the tablet up the mountain. Although he had the intention to kill his son, he also hoped that a god would appear at the critical moment to stop him. He lit the incense, lifted his robe and knelt down, sincerely praying in silence. But after a few kowtows, a beam of light rose from the immortal plate. For a moment, the entire ancient temple was enveloped in golden light. It could be seen that there was an indistinct figure of a Taoist sitting on the altar. After Zhang Yan vanquished the demons, the entire Lu kingdom was grateful and built a temple to worship him. There was also a portrait of him. Yuan Jinping saw that this Taoist looked exactly like his portrait and was shocked. He immediately bowed down and said in fear and trepidation, "Yuan Jinping, greet Master Shangda." After about 10 breaths, he felt someone pat his shoulder and a voice said, "Esteemed guest, please rise. Master Celestial has left." Yuan Jinping looked up and saw that there was no light on the table. He could not help but feel lost. But this Taoist Ru Ming was able to invite Master Celestial to show his divinity, so he must be his disciple. This time, he had no more doubts. He bowed deeply and said gratefully, "If it wasn't for Taoist and Master Shangda, I would have killed my own child. But such a great favor. I really do not know how to repay it." Ru Ming said, "If that's the case, I actually have a matter." Yuan Jinping said solemnly, "Please speak, Taoist." Ru Ming said, "Under the orders of Master Shangda, I went down the mountain to find a suitable disciple. This child is fated with my sect. If you are willing, I am willing to accept this child as my disciple." Yuan Jinping was happy at first, but then he felt sad. He was happy that he could enter Shangda's sect, so naturally, he would be able to climb the celestial gate. He was sad that this child was born and he did not even have a day to raise him. Ru Ming saw his expression and knew why. He smiled and said, "You don't have to be sad. I am also a Tongla person. Even though this child is accepted as Master Celestial's disciple, I will not force him to go up the mountain to cultivate. It won't be too late for him to come under me after he is done with his filial piety." He handed the child back and Yuan Jinping quickly went forward to carry him. Ru Ming took out another Taoist book and passed it to him, saying, "When this child is slightly older, you can order him to cultivate according to this method." Yuan Jinping carefully took it and said solemnly, "I will definitely protect this method and not let it leak out." Ru Ming laughed and stroked his beard, saying, "Master Shangda created this method to open the door to Tao for the people of the world. Anyone who is fated will be able to see it. If you are interested in the path of Tao, there is no harm in cultivating it." Yuan Jinping had only heard of the saying that the method should not be passed on lightly, but he did not expect this Master Celestial to do things so differently. He could not help but exclaim, "You are indeed a Master Celestial of virtue and extreme benevolence." At this moment, he suddenly thought of something and asked, "When this child of mine was at home, all the animals and birds died. Why is that?" Ru Ming said, "This child was born with a spiritual seed. The inner chi in his body revolves on its own and he can see spiritual vigor from the outside. However, he also knows that those close to him are distant, so he only hurt these animals. I will give you a talisman to guard on the beam of the house. Then there will be no hindrance and it can also eliminate the supernatural, so he will be safe." Yuan Jinping's heart relaxed. Even though he did not know what was born with a spiritual seed, he was born and grew up in the world. It was better to live with the light and dust. It was not a good thing for others or himself to be abnormal. After thanking him again and again, he said, "The day this child was born, because I was still in the army, I did not have a name. I only called him Hangguang. Later I suspected that this child was not well, so I delayed it. Since I have entered the celestial sect, please give me a name, Master." Ru Ming pondered for a while and then smiled, saying, "It was originally a heartless heart beyond the heavens. After 10,000 years, it turned into a true spirit. It accidentally fell into the mortal world and gave me a dream. Now that I have wiped away the turbid face, why don't you name this child Jingqing?" Jingqing, Yuan Jianqing, Yuan Jinping repeated it twice and said happily, "Good, good, the big sun is the scenery, Peace is the clear, this name is very good. His excitement might have been a little too big and startled the child. He woke up from his sleep. However, he did not cry or make a fuss. Instead, he started giggling and even stretched out his little hand to grab his father's beard. Yuan Jinping looked at this and was even happier. When he wanted to speak to Ru Ming again, he realized that this Taoist was actually gone. He knew that the Celestial's whereabouts were elusive. In his disappointment, he bowed to the sky and carried the child down the mountain. When he returned home, he followed Ru Ming's instructions and stuck the talisman on the beam of the house. As expected, nothing else happened. From then on, Yuan Jinping was no different from an ordinary child. At the age of 4, he went to school. Because he was smart, sensible and polite. He was praised by his teachers. When Enran was in his teens, Yuan Jinping took out the Taoist book and let him practice it. However, the world was gradually changing. As the big formation in the continent dispersed, drakes went into hibernation. There was no longer anything to fight with the people of Donglai continent for spiritual opportunity. In the past 10 years, there were many spirits and ghosts in the forest. Even the demons that were exterminated showed signs of revival. Therefore, the mobilization of the troops in the county was extremely frequent. As for Yuan Jinping, he did not feel anything. He trained hard every day. For others, the barriers that were difficult to surpass were easily crossed by him. The more he trained, the stronger he felt his body was, and his eyes were clear. Once, he practiced under a tree. After he finished, he felt that the qi in his chest was surging like there was a stone wall. He raised his head and blew, and the branches and leaves of the tree scattered. As for his usual steps, he would feel the wind at his armpits and feel like he was flying. After gaining benefits, he immersed himself in it. On this day, he withdrew from his cultivation and discovered that it was already dusk, and it was nearing the end of the world. His eyes glanced and saw a book on the table. It looked a little old and tattered. He asked curiously, "That's weird. Where did this book come from?" He picked it up and flipped through it. He saw that it was a book about monsters. It was about a swordsman who killed demons. It was said that the swordsman's swordsmanship was brilliant and he killed countless demons in his life. He had a wife called Lady Sang. She was afraid of strangers and did not like candlelight. She usually did not leave her house. One mid-autumn day, the swordsman brought his wife out to admire the moon. Halfway through, he saw that the shadow was a strange tree. He immediately drew his sword and questioned the swordsman. Lady Sang then revealed her background. She was a mulberry tree that became a spirit. Because she admired the swordsman, she willingly married him. The swordsman was angry that she lied to him and killed her under the influence of alcohol. Before she died, Lady Sang said, "I have no regrets." After the swordsman sobered up, he was filled with regret. He immediately broke his sword and buried it with the tree that Lady Sang had transformed into. He built a hut next to it until he died of old age. His descendants buried him under the tree. A few years later, another tree grew. The two branches intertwined as if they were connected. There were many stories about killing demons in the marketplace, but most of them were similar. Yuan Jinping had never seen such a story before. Hence, he read it with great interest. However, he was dissatisfied with the ending. He put down the book and said, "This swordsman is too pedantic." Just as he finished speaking, he heard a soft sigh. Green smoke rose from the book and turned into a beautiful woman. She had willowy eyebrows and cherry lips. Her skin was light and her bones weak. However, there was worry in her eyes. She looked pitiful. Yuan Jinping was not afraid. Because his father, Yuan Jinping, was now an official in the prefecture. Although he was only a youth, he had seen many demons. His horizons were much wider than the average person. He stood up and asked, "Who are you?" The woman bowed and said softly, "I am that Lady Sang. My descendants cut off my body and made it into paper. A strand of my soul has been attached to this book. I have never been able to free myself. Today, when I heard young master's voice, I felt that I was fated to meet you. If young master can help me free myself, I will definitely repay you. Yuan Jianqing said, then how can you free yourself? The woman said, as long as young master takes a few drops of your blood every day and drips it on this book, I will be free after 49 days. Yuan Jianqing frowned and said, when did I agree to help you? Young master, just now, you are not. Yuan Jianqing waved his sleeves and said coldly, your matter only sounds tempting. It can relieve my boredom. What does it have to do with me? The woman covered her lips and revealed a pitiful look. She said with tears, I did not expect young master to be such a heartless person. Yuan Jianqing sneered, heartless? Hee, you first used the book to tempt me and then used words to tempt me. You must have some ulterior motives. You are obviously a demon. As he said this, he pulled out the sword from his waist and slashed down. The woman did not expect this young master to turn hostile so quickly. She was shocked and wanted to dodge, but there was a flash of talisman on the roof of the house. She could not move and was immediately hit. With a scream, she disappeared like a bubble. The pages of the book also turned into black dust and scattered in the hall.